This new story about survival during the apocalypse begins like many others, with betrayal. The main character of this story is named Zhang Xiaoyang, and now he is in a hanging state, literally. He's hanging right above a cage full of bloodthirsty zombies, and his ex-girlfriend is laughing and mocking him, reminding that all his friends are dead. But he may not worry. Soon his meaningless life will also end and he can join his friends. Thinking back on what happened, Xiaoyang couldn't forgive himself for letting it all happen. It was all his fault. Or rather, it was his fault for trusting this evil woman who deserved a miserable death. That's who the real villain here is. But for her, all the threats of our hero were not scary at all. She found herself a boyfriend, stronger and richer, and now asked him to deal with this garbage. The fat man was not at all against helping and offered to torture Zhang Xiaoyang slowly, so that the girl could enjoy the sight and let out her anger. Before pressing the button, the fat man mockingly thanked Xiaoyang for all his supplies. Thanks to his generosity, they would be able to live comfortably for a few months. That was the end of the conversation, and Xiaoyang fell right into the zombie cage. For these insane creatures, there was no difference in what to attack. Fresh flesh was the only thing they desired in this world. The bound Xiaoyang could only scream in pain, and dream that if he had a second chance to live his life again, he would make his ex-girlfriend Qi Jing and fatty Li Shuxiang pay for what they had done. But suddenly, it was as if Xiaoyang woke up and heard Qi Jing's nasty, disgusting voice demanding an explanation. She wanted to know why it was that he still hadn't put her name on the house deeds. Does he not love her at all? Xiaoyang, meanwhile, was trying to come to his senses and realize what was going on. Had he been reborn in the time before the apocalypse? In his past life, he was deceived by Qi Jing. Not only did she swindle away the inheritance his parents left him, but he also ended up homeless. Later, the apocalypse began, and a global catastrophe turned people into zombies, plunging the entire world into chaos. But even in the midst of this chaos, Xiaoyang was not confused, and with the help of friends managed to survive and after some wandering built a safe zone. In it they could not be afraid of zombies, and thanks to good supplies they could live there for months. That's when Qi Jing appeared again. She pretended to be a desperate person who was looking for shelter, and she won Xiaoyang's sympathy again. Yes, it was stupid, and he realized it himself now. The very next night, she opened the gates of the safe zone to the enemies who had long dreamed of destroying them. Now, this same traitorous woman was not calming down and demanded 400,000 yuan bride price in addition to the house if he wanted to marry her. She behaved the same as always, confident that Xiaoyang was enchanted by her beauty and couldn't see her rotten character. But this time it will be different. He won't let this evil thing twist him around. However, he needs to act carefully. Being overly impulsive could hurt him now. Qi Jing gave him a week's time to do what she demanded, otherwise the wedding would be cancelled. At this, Xiaoyang threw her out of the house and assured her that he understood. Qi Jing was not used to such an attitude and couldn't understand what was going on. Since when had her slave Xiaoyang become so assertive? Had he changed his mind about being her servant? Now that he was rid of that annoying traitor, he could look around. There was only a month left before the apocalypse began, and Xiaoyang had to start preparing immediately, or else it would be too late later. Suddenly, he received a notification like in some kind of game. He received a system mission after activating the apocalypse system. The mission had a very common name, Apocalypse Preparation. To complete it, he needed to own a piece of land and prepare a year's stock of supplies. For completing it, Xiaoyang could get 10 points, which he could exchange for rewards in the system store. Our hero was pleasantly surprised by such a bonus. The system, missions, and rewards for their completion. What else is needed for happiness? Just what could be bought in the system store Xiaoyang did not know. Mostly there were loot boxes and some potions, for example, to improve physical strength. But from all this, our hero was distracted by his stomach grumbling and demanding a proper meal. Xiaoyang had almost forgotten how in his previous life he was skimping and saving every penny to gather Qi Jing's bride price, which left him malnourished. Now he was not going to limit himself and decided to have a fancy dinner delivered. In a month's time, zombies would be everywhere, and as long as good food is available, he should take advantage of it. A few hours later, the delivery arrived. Xiaoyang would never have allowed himself such a legendary Michelin 3-star takeaway before. He decided to start by tasting what a 300 yuan braised pork tasted like. After what he ate during the apocalypse, it was divine and just too good to be true. Our hero didn't stop there and went into food devourer mode. His appetite was quite good and soon he was almost done. Just at this moment, the phone rang. Wen Shuya, Qi Jing's friend, was calling, which meant that she had already managed to complain to her. Xiaoyang answered the phone and immediately regretted it. A shout immediately came from the phone, Wen Shuya demanding to explain how dare he treat Qi Jing like that. She just wanted him to prove his love. If he can't give her his property, then how can he say he loves her? Actually, Qi Jing was just testing him a little and he failed the test. But if he brings the house deeds and 1,000,000 yuan in cash as an apology, Then Wen Shuya will try to help him convince Kui Jing that it was just a misunderstanding. If he doesn't, he can expect a breakup. After such a long speech, our hero simply ran out of patience. Who does she think she is to test him? With an attitude like that, she should just get lost. Wen Shuya still tried to object, but Xiaoyang just ended the call. He was already fed up with these money-hungry girls. He didn't care about them now. The most important thing was to find and buy a suitable piece of land. There he could build the strongest fortress, which would not only be easy to defend, but also close to a source of water and forest. The next morning, he arrived at the real estate agency. He was immediately greeted by a consultant and asked if he had come to rent or buy a house. Xiaoyang assured her that it was neither. He was here for something more valuable. Suddenly, a real estate sales manager came up behind them and ordered the consultant Xiaoning to go and help carry the boxes. They received a big shipment of toilet paper today. She tried to explain that she had a customer, but it was no use. Manager Zhu didn't see Xiaoyang as a customer at all. He even scolded his subordinate for forgetting everything he taught her. Convinced that you can't be a real estate agent without flair, he sent her to work in the backyard and told our hero that such a broke loser in cheap clothes probably cannot even afford to buy a toilet, so he can't even be called a customer. This arrogant attitude annoyed our hero, and he was going to teach this manager a lesson. To start with, Xiaoyang asked him to repeat what he just said and explain how dare he look down on the others. Manager Zhu was not going to back down. Confident in his power, he proudly declared that he was a man who looks down on dogs like our hero. If Xiaoyang could buy himself at least a toilet, he would eat shit on livestream. One look at Xiaoyang was enough to realize that the manager would soon regret about his words. Well, since the manager said so himself, Xiaoyang advised him to make sure he would find some fresh, steaming ones later. After all, our hero didn't come here today to rent or sell a house, but to buy land. All the customers around him were shocked. It was the first time they had seen someone rich enough to buy land. In that case, Ms. Xiaoning invited him to sit down so she could give him a detailed introduction. Manager Zhu watched all this with gritted teeth, confident that anyone could talk. But when it came to payment, he didn't believe that Xiaoyang would be able to pay. Xiaoning provided our hero all the pieces of land available for purchase. He could view them while she would explain everything. But for our hero, none of that was necessary. He knew exactly what he wanted. Xiaoyang was going to name his requirements and let her see if they had anything suitable. Xiaoyang wanted the land to be near mountains and water, preferably with running water. It would be ideal to have factories or large buildings on the land. To find something suitable, Xiaoning needed a little time. But then Manager Zhu came from behind again. He seemed to have a hobby of approaching from behind. He thought that the piece of land that fit all the requirements is located in the Eastern District. Xiaoning thought it was a bad idea. That place was the T-City land. There were many unfinished factories and pending projects there. Such property couldn't be sold to customers. Manager Zhu didn't think so. He still hadn't seen any customers here. And this loser with such high demands in his opinion was not here to buy land, but to make trouble. Xiaoyang didn't really care where the land was located, as long as it met his requirements. Incomplete factories were also not a problem. Even on the contrary, an advantage. After looking at the details, our hero decided that it was exactly what he needed. With the barbed wire, this place would be easy to defend, and unfinished factories would save a lot of money and time on construction. So he agreed to buy this land. He was ready to sign the contract now and pay for the purchase. Xiaoning was shocked. She couldn't believe that someone in his right mind was going to buy this land with unfinished factories. But still Xiaoyang stood firm and even asked her to do it quickly because someone here couldn't wait to eat fresh poop. Soon enough, Manager Zhu held the check in his hands and couldn't believe it was possible. This ragamuffin was able to pay 300,000 wen for a land with abandoned factories. This was just crazy to him. Xiaoyang reminded him before he left that he had made the payment, and now it was his turn to perform. While Zhu is enjoying the process, Xiaoyang will send him a donation in Super Chat so that he won't be so offended. The other customers started encouraging the fat manager to hurry up because they had already started the stream. One just had a stomach that didn't feel good, but he promised that it would at least be fresh. Thus, Xiaoyang had completed the first step of the system task. Now it was time to get to the second one. Xiaoyang had spent all the money to buy the land, and now he needed to figure out how to get money to accumulate supplies. When he was leaving the real estate agency, he was recognized by an old acquaintance, Li Shuxiang, and he immediately wondered what our hero was doing here. However, all these questions flew out of his head when he saw what was going on inside. The staff and customers were forcing Manager Zhu to keep his promise while he was desperately asking for help and how much he didn't want to eat poop. Meanwhile, Kui Jing was painting her nails and enjoying life carefree. She got a call from Li Shuxiang and asked if she knew that Xiaoyang had come to the real estate company to buy land. Of course she didn't know, and was shocked at where he got so much money from. Li Shuxiang clarified that Xiaoyang had paid 300,000 yuan, probably the bride price money he saved. Now she was just furious that that bastard dared to use her money. Li Shuqiang advised her to calm down and not get mad, but rather go find Xiaoyang and ask him what was going on. But she was blinded by anger. She wasn't going to ask him anything. That bastard was using her money and she was going to expose him today. In the meantime, our hero had his own worries. Buying supplies and building a base required a lot of money to be found. All his peaceful musings were interrupted by a frantic knock on the door. It was Jing along with her sister. She was still furious that he dared to spend her money. Xiaoyang still couldn't understand what she was talking about. Jing, on the other hand, continued as she thought to expose him that he used the bride price money to buy land. That money belonged to her, and since he bought the land with it, it also belonged to her. Xiaoyang didn't even know how to respond to this crazy woman's claims. He finally decided to explain things to her in a way that even a dumbass like her would understand. He has a lot of money, but he's not going to spend a single cent on her. Besides, he knows about her affairs with Li Shuqiang. Jing didn't understand what was going on and how he even knew about her and Li Shuqiang. Her sister, seeing where things were going, suggested to everyone to calm down and solve this little misunderstanding between a couple. But Xiaoyang was not going to waste his precious time on these two. There is no misunderstanding here. Jing is not his girlfriend, but a pathetic doormat of that old fatty Li Shuqiang. Right after that, he slammed the door in her face and told her to get lost. Just looking at her already annoys him. Jing still couldn't understand how he knew. She and Li Shuqiang had always been very careful when renting rooms. Her sister didn't know about them either, and didn't understand why her sister didn't share such important information with her up front. Is she really dating that middle-aged man? Jing assured that it was nothing serious. They had just rented rooms a few times. In such an out-of-control situation, they had no choice but to go home and come up with a new plan. That's all they could do. Since her sister screwed up with Xiaoyang, Wen Shuya herself was now not going to hold back and wanted to charm Xiaoyang. After all, they are good sisters. The next day, Xiaoyang arrived on his land together with a construction crew. He wanted to rebuild one factory, and he was wondering how long it would take. After a detailed analysis, Foreman Li summarized that reinforcing the walls, building protective towers, installing Texas barbed wire, thickening the steel armored doors, and adding bulletproof glass were all time-consuming processes. But he was interested in one additional question. What kind of power had offended our hero that he needed to build such a fortress? Xiaoyang advised him not to ask too much because knowing too much does not lead to anything good. Our hero just wanted to know how much it would cost to finish the construction in a month. Foreman assured him that it couldn't be done in a month. In that case, Xiaoyang knew many who were willing to do it instead. Foreman replied that the lives and well-being of the workers were worth more. This surprised our hero. He had first met Foreman with conscience, but it turned out that he was wrong. It just meant that there would be a lot of money needed. Xiaoyang asked him to tell him the price without delay. Foreman Li calculated that if they had to finish the project in a month, the workers would have to work around the clock, so the cost would be 6 digits. The price was 20 million, and they wanted to get a deposit of 5 million yuan before they started construction so they could start work right away. But this option was not quite suitable for our hero. He wanted them to start work right away, and he would transfer the money to them within a week. The construction company didn't have to worry that he wouldn't pay. If he couldn't, that land would be theirs. Suddenly, Wen Shuya appeared on the construction site. She defiantly hugged his arm and asked him what he was doing here. Xiaoyang was already sick of this rotten woman. In his previous life, she, along with Jing, had forced him out of his parents' legacy. And this time, he was willing to make her pay twice as much. All her attempts were useless. No matter how much she tried to act like a nice girl, he could see her rotten nature. She asked if this was the land he bought. It's such a beautiful view, and Xiaoyang probably wants to build a villa here, right? But whatever he builds here is none of her business. Seeing this attitude, she couldn't understand what was going on. Since when did that loser behave so strangely? Usually just her touch on his arm was enough to make him blush and his heart start pounding. But today, none of that worked. Instead, he indifferently turned away from her and went to instruct the construction workers what they were doing wrong, and that the gate needed to be widened. Wen Shuya couldn't afford to miss such a golden opportunity. Since Jing had ruined everything with her cheating, she should move her, and this land would become hers. Xiaoyang returned home and wondered how he could get more money. After he mortgaged the house to the bank, he only got a 3 million yuan loan. It wasn't enough to cover the cost of even the first phase of construction. Although if you thought about it that way, the apocalypse was inevitable anyway, and if he sold the house to a few people, it wouldn't matter. It was something that needed to be dealt with. Just in time, there was a knock on the door. It was the damn annoying old man neighbor. He lived downstairs, and his name was Grandpa Li. He was a rich old bastard. He owned the apartments on the first and second floor and wanted to buy the third floor too, but Xiaoyang wouldn't agree to sell it. So this old man was doing all sorts of nasty things, painting the doors, scattering trash, bringing coffin and jamming lock to the doors. He's been up to all kinds of dirty tricks, and now he's come to complain that Xiaoyang made noise last night by having a party here. Of course it was a deliberate lie. Our hero went to bed early last night and didn't do anything like that. But there was no point in arguing further. Xiaoyang knew that the old man wanted his house, so he pretended that he was fed up and gave up. Now he was ready to sell the house to the old man. The old geezer couldn't believe his ears. But Xiaoyang had a condition. He wanted to stay living in the house for another 6 months until he found a new place to live. But the old man must transfer 5 million into his account right now so he could pay the deposit for the new house. If the old man doesn't agree to this condition, he can forget about the deal. The greedy old bastard couldn't let that slip away and agreed, but demanded to sign the contract so that Xiaoyang couldn't change his mind later. This was no problem for our hero. That old bastard would still die in his house when the apocalypse started. Once old Li transferred 5 million yuan, then in sum with the loan from the bank, Xiaoyang had collected 8 million. Now it's time to complete the second task and get the reward. The biggest supermarket was perfect for this task. Xiaoyang began to diligently stock up on supplies for the year ahead. People around him looked at him as a mentally unstable guy and preferred to stay away. Finally, he dragged a whole bunch of grocery carts to the checkout line. People around him still didn't understand why he was buying so much stuff. They just laughed at him like he was just another fool who believed in rumors about the apocalypse and the end of the world. But their conversations didn't mean anything. The most important thing was that Xiaoyang had completed the system's task and received 10 points. Among all the options available in the system store, the protagonist's supply box was worth 10 points. And Xiaoyang didn't hesitate to use this opportunity and decided to spend all the available points on this box. The purchase was successful, and he received this mysterious box. After opening it, he received a level 1 space ring that allowed him to use his own subspace of 500 cubic meters. Also inside this space, time stood still, allowing the items inside to not spoil. This was an incredibly successful gain. There was a reason why our hero had a good feeling about this box. The fact that the time inside the subspace stood still meant that he could even store fresh food inside and it would never spoil. Along with the new item, Xiaoyang also received a new mission, 10 years of sustenance. For its completion, it was possible to get 20 points. But suddenly our hero was called by the supermarket security chief. He'd gotten word that some crazy guy was causing trouble. Turns out he knew Xiaoyang. The security chief's name was Yang Tao. He went to the same high school as our hero and was the lackey of a local bully who bullied the weak and feared the strong. In the past, he had extorted money from high school students for his boss, and Xiaoyang had frequent conflicts with him. Today, Xiaoyang didn't expect to run into him here. Yang Tao demanded that our hero put all these things back where he got them from, otherwise he would not be kind to him. Xiaoyang replied that he still hadn't changed and was still bullying the weak. But our hero was not going to return anything. He is a customer here, and he is always right. Is this really how customers are treated? Then Yang Tao demanded that Xiaoyang pay for the items right now, otherwise it would be his own fault for being cruel. After an hour, all the cashiers in the supermarket finally calculated the price of all the items. A total of 56,000 yuan. Yang Tao immediately demanded to pay, and our hero did not hesitate to use his credit card as a superhero weapon. The transaction was successful, and the security chief was shocked. He turned around and was about to leave, accepting his defeat, but Xiaoyang ordered him to wait. Yang Tao didn't realize what he was doing. But it was simple. Yang Tao had been rude, and now our hero wanted a public apology, or else he would return all those goods. The security chief thought that he had gone too far and was only looking for trouble. However, there were too many witnesses around. They saw everything and fully supported our hero. They recorded everything on video and threatened Yang Tao to make him famous all over the internet if he didn't apologize. Xiaoyang also promised that if the apology was sincere enough, he would buy the goods here 10 times more. If Yang Tao didn't believe him, then he could bring the POS machine and our hero would show him his balance. Yang Tao couldn't believe it when he saw 7 million in the account. Xiaoyang only demanded to apologize, and then he would continue buying. While the security chief struggled with his pride, this battle was short-lived and he lost. The pressure was too high and he gave up and apologized. Passing by, Xiaoyang advised him not to be so thoughtless in the future because you never know how the situation will turn out. Now Yang Tao put on a mask of benevolence and asked why our hero buys so many things. Of course, Xiaoyang replied it was none of his business. He was planning a big deal. In that case, Yang Tao knew what to offer. The items in this supermarket's warehouse were not enough. If Xiaoyang wanted to make a big deal, he should have found a wholesaler. And he just knew one since he worked at the supermarket. It was Zhang Shengzhe. He was currently in the wholesale business. He immediately called him and happily told him that he had found a big customer for him. Xiaoyang realized that some people never change, and since these two bullies still worked together, He could only wonder how much they were ripping off this supermarket. Soon they arrived at the wholesale warehouse together. An expensive car drove up to them rather carelessly. From the way Zhang Shengji drove arrogantly, our hero realized that he had probably never been scanned before, and it was time to fix that. It was a meeting of old friends, although the arrogant boss didn't recognize our hero right away, and Tao had to remind that they once went to middle and high school together. Even so, Shengji had a hard time remembering who Xiaoyong was at first. But after thinking for a while, he finally remembered. It was exactly that guy with a bit of a backbone. Shengji took one look at his former classmate. He didn't like the cheap non-designer clothes at all. He despised people who pretended to be rich when they weren't. Shengji had already made a conclusion about our hero based on his clothes. He immediately turned to Tao to teach this idiot a lesson for bringing him such a useless big client and wasting his time. Shengji even gave him a kick in the ass to think better next time, even though Tao tried to stand his ground, knowing that Xiaoyong was actually rich. Shengji couldn't even allow such a thought. He had been in this business for years, and as he thought he could tell at a glance who was rich and who wasn't. Xiaoyong saw that some people never change and called Shengji an illiterate who looks down on people. Shengji immediately grabbed him and demanded him to repeat what he just said. Xiaoyong was absolutely not afraid of him, and repeated to his face that he looked down on people. But it turned out that it was not this that offended him at all, but the fact that our hero called him illiterate. This was not what Xiaoyong had expected. It turned out that this bastard was really shameless. Tao, seeing the impending fight, hurriedly intervened and advised our hero not to touch Shengji's sore point. He is really illiterate, so he hates to be called like that. But for saying that, Tao received another kick and insults from Shengji, who was angry because he was not allowed to do what he wanted. Turning to our hero, Shengji gave him a condition. Either Xiaoyong buys a truckload of goods from him or crawl back on all fours. Our hero was more than satisfied with this. He ordered Shengji to let go of his collar and call out the account number. In just a moment, the angry expression on Shengji's face changed to a shocked one. Xiaoyong had somehow actually transferred $1 million into his account. According to our hero, it was only a deposit. He had plans to buy $5 million worth of goods. Shengji asked what kind of goods he needed. Xiaoyong replied that he needed oil, rice, salt, snacks, and drinks. Simply put, the products that didn't spoil for a long time. An imperceptible smile appeared on Shengji's face. He had just received a batch of almost expired food, and this was the perfect opportunity to slip it to Xiaoyong. Upon arriving at the warehouse with the food, Shengji offered our hero to pick up the entire shipment at a discount of 10% off the original wholesale price. The offer was great. However, Xiaoyong realized that Shengji wouldn't sell him food at such a cheap price so simply. So the first thing he decided to do was to check the quality of the food. As Xiaoyong suspected, it was a trap. Although the packaging looked new, the food was almost expired. Shengji didn't expect Xiaoyong to figure out his plan so quickly. He immediately offered him a discount of as much as 50%. But our hero wasn't satisfied with this deal. With this $5 million, he intended to buy the highest quality food. However, he had plans for this expired product as well. Xiaoyong told Shengji that he was willing to take the expired goods from him for half the price, but with the condition that the payment would be made in a month. Shengji was incredulous at our hero's words, but Xiaoyong replied that he would pledge his house. Shengji was confused because he didn't understand why Xiaoyong needed the expired food. He couldn't even suspect that after a while, even this expired food would be worth its weight in gold. Xiaoyong didn't intend to go into details and told Shengji to deliver the goods to him at the right address. Suddenly, someone called to our hero regarding the sale of a house. Quickly saying goodbye to Shengji and Tao, he left. The buyer was an old man who was ready to pay 400,000 down payment and give Xiaoyong 3 months to move out. Everything was going so well that it made our hero a little wary. He asked the old man why he was in such a hurry. He replied that his granddaughter was about to change schools and she needed a place to live. Xiaoyong was the only one selling the house in the neighborhood. The old man was so honest that he gave Xiaoyong all the information himself. Our hero asked if he was afraid that with this information, he might raise the price. The old man realized his mistake, and in a panic began to beg our hero not to do this, as it was all his savings. Xiaoyong was not a scumbag who took advantage of innocent people's kindness. He replied that their deal was on, then signed the contract. The old man was incredibly happy, for now his granddaughter had a place to live. He was so kind and polite that he even apologized to Xiaoyong for distracting him from his work. Realizing how kind and honest the old man was, our hero felt that he and his granddaughter would not last a month in the apocalypse. Calling out to the old man who was already leaving, he asked him for his address. After a while, Xiaoyong arrived at his own land, where work was in full swing. After telling the foreman that the payment would be transferred soon, he inquired about the progress. As it turned out, almost 80% of the construction had been completed. The protection and thickness of the walls and doors were just as he had requested. The warehouse was based on the factory, There everything was ready, and the warehouse could be used. This was great news. Xiaoyang immediately called Shengji and told him to bring the supplies. Soon the warehouse, more like a doomsday vault, began to fill up with resources. Under Xiaoyang's strict command, everything was ready by evening. As soon as the workers left, our hero could finally evaluate the work done. Everything had gone according to his plan, and now he could exhale. At the same time, the system sent a notification that he had successfully completed the task, for which he received 20 system points. When Xiaoyang opened the system store, he saw that there was a new box with awakened abilities in it. This meant that he could obtain supernatural abilities before the apocalypse began. Xiaoyang bought one box without a second thought. When he opened the box, he obtained a level 1 ability called Mind's Eye, thanks to which he could detect the hostility of the target. Xiaoyang was glad, because in his opinion, this was one of the most useful skills in the early stages of the apocalypse. The system didn't seem to want our hero to relax, as it soon sent him another task. This time he needed to obtain weapons. Lots of weapons. Xiaoyang didn't mind at all, as that was exactly what he intended to do. It was time to get some guns. With the new task at hand to arm himself for the upcoming apocalypse, Jiang Xiaoyang found himself in the seedy underbelly of the city, the busy late-night black market. Walking around, he could hear the incessant haggling and obnoxious noises of customers and sellers trying to get better deals for themselves. There were scammers everywhere. Suddenly, something caught our MC's attention. Something he saw out of the corner of his eye. It was a man familiar to him, the man that Kui Jing was clinging to in the first apocalypse, Li Shuxiang. He was aggressively trying to bring down the price of some fake jewelry, eventually whittling down the seller to agree. Jiang Xiaoyang was not expecting to run into this guy tonight, but it made sense that the bastard would be trolling for fake jade bracelets. That witch, Kui Jing, was actually dumb enough to be tricked by fake gifts. A few feet away, he finally found a stall selling some promising wares. Sharp blades were lined up on the floor, each one more lethal than the last. As soon as he laid eyes on those sharp blades, a smile crept up on his face. He finally found what he was looking for. Squatting down in front of the seller, he boldly asked if they sold any hard stuff at this stall. Mr. Camouflage, who looked like a military man, wasn't amused by any of his cryptic messaging. The dude threw him a knife sharpener, telling the young man to grind the blades himself for something harder. Growing more serious, he commented that none of these knives were hard enough. What he was looking for was something a lot tougher. Realizing what he was implying, Mr. Camo turned deathly serious and asked if he was asking for trouble. Mr. Camo's irritation was interrupted by the sound of his phone notification that 200,000 yuan had been transferred into his bank account. In front of him was Jiang Xiaoyang, holding up the receipt after he sent the astronomical funds through the QR code at the stall. This was his way of pacifying the irate seller and proving that he was a serious buyer. Finally convinced, Mr. Camo called one of his men to come and watch the stall while he handled real business. His attitude towards Jiang Xiaoyang made a 180-degree turn as he politely led the young man to another building, as talking outside could be a little inconvenient. They did not have any problems entering the innocuous building next to the store. Mr. Camo was now trying to sell Xiaoyang some homemade guns for small targets. They cost 2,000 yuan, and ammo would come cheap. Our boy immediately declined. That stoked Mr. Camo's competitive spirit a little bit. So, he busted out some replica revolvers modeled after active-duty handguns. For 5,000 yuan, you'd get a 9mm shooter. Bullets would be 5 yuan a pop. For Xiaoyang, this much was barely acceptable, but he prepaid 200,000 yuan. This junk did not stoke his interest at all. Confused by the mention of prepayment, Mr. Camo asked what he meant by it. Jiang Xiaoyang proclaimed that the initial transfer from earlier was just a 10% prepayment for his order of 2 million yuan worth of weaponry. Mr. Camo was getting a little worried regarding this mysterious buyer's affiliation. Xiaoyang made up some BS about how his subordinates usually handle this type of sleazy buys, but he's here now and doesn't appreciate unwelcomed questions regarding his identity. Sensing that the young man must mean some serious business, Mr. Camo respectfully urged him to wait just a moment while frantically running to a different room. He hurriedly turned the lock on the entrance. Just to be safe, Mr. Camo also gave the surrounding area a quick look around through the window. He turned to Jiang Xiaoyang and claimed that he came to the right person. Walking closer, he whispered that he'd handle this matter. All he needed was an address, and they'd proceed with the transaction at midnight the day after tomorrow. He'd only accept cash. By the time Jiang Xiaoyang exited the innocuous place, Mr. Camo was practically treating him like a VIP. Xiaoyang was just unlucky enough to get back to the night market street right when the familiar bastard from earlier was walking around. Li Shuqiang commented on this unexpected meeting in a black market no less. Now it makes sense why the young man has been spending so much lately. There's also the matter of Kui Jing. He reckoned that the kid must have seen too much financial advice lately, and now he's trying to lie flat, sell everything, and live in comfort. Unbothered by all the nonsensical words of a fat bastard, Zhang Xiaoyang thought it would be more practical to just try out his newly acquired ability. Opening his mind's eye, an imperceptible aura lit up his gaze. He could see a happy face indicator on top of Mr. Camo's head and an angry one on Li Shuxiang's. This was a very useful ability, as he had expected. To experiment more, he talked trash about the fat bastard buying fake and secondhand goods to trick Kui Jing. That girl was also his secondhand trash, so it made sense that she was only worth so much. Hearing that made the fat bastard's indicator even angrier as he cursed out the young man after hitting a nerve. Seeing the developing conflict, Mr. Camo stepped in and asked his new big fish client if the fuming fat bastard was bothering Xiaoyang. He labeled Li Shuxiang as an enemy. Taking the hint, Mr. Camo assured his new big bro that he and his staff would teach the fat bastard a lesson. Xiaoyang was cool with that, but he reminded them not to go too far as he had other plans for Li Shuxiang in the future. Seeing a group of well-built thugs coming after his fat ass, the wannabe gangster started freaking out, stumbling over his words and losing his arrogance. Mr. Camo did not waste any more words on the piece of trash and pulled out a baton. The boys made quick work of the fat bastard, leaving him beaten and bruised in the middle of the dark road. There were shoe prints all over his face and his white suit from all the kicking he endured. This event only strengthened his distaste for Zhang Xiaoyang. 2 days later, the rendezvous was set at the warehouse, and it seemed like both parties were on time for the agreement. In front of Xiaoyang was a truckload of suspicious crates. This was precisely what he wanted. The arrival of his firearm signaled the success of his battle-ready task, rewarding him with 10 system points, bringing his total up to 20. Inside the crates were heavy firearms, rifles, pistols, and every extra piece of equipment he might need. For some reason, the system also added a bonus reward, a +2 physical enhancement potion. Holding the syringe in his hand, he was pretty pleased with the unexpected drop of this bonus. With the +2 classification, it was even double the efficacy of the one in the system store. Not wasting another second, he lifted that syringe and aimed at his veins. He was expecting a tiny pinch of the needle, but the strength potion coursing through his bloodstream was an agonizing process. As an average adult male, his physical score would be around 5 points. With an increase of +2, that's practically a 40% boost in his overall power. Since that's the case, he resolved to open the system store, his gaze locking in on the other physical enhancement potion listed there. Realizing the value of increased strength while holding another massive syringe, he might as well maximize the advantage it would give. After injecting another strength cheat code, his physical score had finally reached 8. He was practically 60% stronger than an average man, and he was eager to test this out. Seeing some loose iron bars strewn around the warehouse, the idea of testing struck Zhang Xiaoyang. He took one of the iron bars, one of those thick ones used for reinforcing buildings. Xiaoyang threw it up in the air and proceeded to kick it as fast and hard as he could. His attack bent the thick rod quite noticeably. The momentum carried on with the stick flying right into the nearby wall. Xiaoyang's kick was powerful enough to make a decent dent in a wall through the iron bar. With his current strength, his bare hands are practically weapons now. He would be comfortable going up against an early apocalypse right about now. As for the weapons he just procured, keeping them out in the open would be a stupid move, so it would be better to store them in the spatial ring for safety. Xiaoyang just pointed his magical ring at the contents of the truck, and they were promptly absorbed. If everything proceeds as he remembers, the day after tomorrow will mark the first day of the apocalypse. He doesn't have much time to do everything else that needs to be done. For some reason, he couldn't brush off the image of that old man pleading to buy his house, using a modest amount of hard-earned cash for his granddaughter. Zhang Xiaoyang had been through countless life-and-death scenarios and treachery in the first apocalypse, but ignoring the plight of the unfortunate had never been his style. Maybe he'll send some essential supplies to the old man. That's the least he could do to help him and his granddaughter's chances of survival. It's a repayment of sorts for supplying Xiaoyang's apocalypse funds. The very next day, Zhang Xiaoyang drove to a rundown apartment building in a shady part of a different city. Without GPS, finding this place would have been impossible, given how hidden and decrepit it was. Seeing as the old man had been renting in such a cheap and old place without an elevator, it was evident that he wasn't well off. Their unit was even on the top floor. Reaching the door, Xiaoyang casually knocked. He suddenly realized that he should take out the supplies from his storage ring, or he would have a hard time explaining where they came from. Activating its effects, boxes upon boxes of essential supplies stacked on top of one another filled the hallway. At that moment, the old man reached the door. He opened it and immediately assumed it was the landlord, promising to pay rent next week. When he got a good look at the young man, he realized it was Mr. Jiang. With him were the boxes crowding the hallway, stretching through the staircase, which confused the old man even more. Xiaoyang promised to explain the deal later. They needed to get these boxes inside before the neighbors saw them. After a few minutes of lifting, which was done mostly by Xiaoyang, They managed to get everything inside. The old man was impressed that the young man didn't even look tired. Meanwhile, Xiaoyang was just surveying the room and analyzing if it would be a suitable emergency shelter, and it was. The front door was solid enough. Next, he urged the old man to listen carefully to what he was about to say. He explained that the supplies should be used wisely, as they should last for about half a year starting tomorrow. Just as he was about to go into more detail, Xiaoyang was taken aback by a photo displayed in the room. The old man was still confused. In the photo was the proud old man and his beautiful granddaughter. Much to Xiaoyang's surprise, the girl in the photo was a close friend he had during the first apocalypse, Shanshan. He promptly asked the old man if the girl in the photo was named Meng Shanshan. This confused the old man even further, as he had never mentioned her name to the young man before. Xiaoyang's expression darkened, and he hurriedly asked the old man where the girl was. She was still at school while they were arranging the transfer paperwork. The young man could still remember when Shanshan expressed her regrets about dooming her grandpa in the early days of the first apocalypse. As far as he could remember, Shanshan's grandpa would end up risking everything to save her. The old man would bravely break into her zombie-infested school. In that doomed timeline, he would manage to save her, but would die in the process. Being a close aide in his previous life, Xiaoyang resolved to never let that kind of pain happen to Shanshan again. He turned to the old man and declared that the house wasn't for sale anymore. The innocent grandpa panicked, thinking Mr. Jiang was pulling out of the deal. But Xiaoyang gave him a tougher pill to swallow. The world would turn into a living hell tomorrow. The house and Shanshan's school wouldn't matter anymore. For now, they needed to pick her up and transfer her to a safer place. This sudden declaration only confused the old man even more. Xiaoyang was in such a rush that he failed to factor in the incredulity of the apocalypse. It was hard to explain what was about to happen to an old man. So, he used a more understandable term for an old head, urging the old man to imagine how tragic and terrifying living through a famine was. Sure, it sounded scary, but famines couldn't happen in times of peace, right? Realizing that no words could convince the old man to trust him, Jiang Xiaoyang took a show-don't-tell approach. He sucked all the supply boxes back into his storage ring in an instant. He even included everything else in the room. By the time he was done, the old man was looking at an empty, spacious room. There was no other word to describe it other than magic. Jiang Xiaoyang proclaimed that he had superpowers and could see into the future. The old man needed to listen to everything he said to survive and save Shanshan. Their next move was to take the girl out of that school. On the car ride to where Shanshan was, the old man's mouth still hung wide open, his eyes fixated on the unbelievable young man. To get there as fast as possible, Xiaoyang drove like a madman, as if traffic laws were merely suggestions. Running out of the vehicle, they needed to find Shanshan wherever she was. In front of one of the department buildings was a young woman surrounded by a few other students. It was none other than Shanshan. Right now, some stereotypical witch was slapping her across the face because some boy liked her. With defiant eyes, Shanshan insisted that she didn't even want to be with the freak, and she didn't like the attention from the creep. Another witch stepped in and kicked her in the stomach for daring to talk back. Two witches took turns beating her up out of jealousy over all the attention Shanshan was getting because of her beauty. The situation was rapidly accelerating, only to be interrupted by the voice of the old man after seeing his granddaughter in such a heartbreaking position. Those witches turned their attention to the grandpa running towards his precious granddaughter. He yelled at the unruly young women for what they were doing to Shanshan, telling them to let go of the girl. That's when some ugly thugs stood in his path, telling the old man to step back and let the girls settle their business without interruption, deliberately showing their blunt weapons and blades. The old man did not hesitate to charge in, even when threatened with knives, yelling at the boys for being mannerless bullies. One of the thugs raised his steel bat, aiming it at the old man's head. It would have been quite a severe ordeal had the bat hit, but Xiaoyang decided to step in on time, stopping the bully's attack. He looked at the young waste of space. It seemed like young guns were still learning to be thugs. The other two shifted their attention to Xiaoyang. They thought he was Shanshan's older brother or something. An easy target, nevertheless. The bully's hands holding the steel bat didn't budge no matter how he struggled, and then Xiaoyang made him eat a solid kick to the solar plexus. The poor thug flew into the air, looking like he had been launched by a cannon. Looking at the fate of the first thug, the other two hesitated for a moment. By the looks of it, Xiaoyang seemed trained in combat. Maybe if they went at him as a double team, they could sneak a hit in. But judging by the cold and calculating glare of Xiaoyang, that didn't seem to be the case. Two thugs, one at the front holding a knife and the other at the back holding a bat. This was the best plan two wannabe thugs could cook up. The first one to make a move was the one from the flank, doing a full bat swing. Sensing the incoming attack, Xiaoyang was easily dodged by swift ducking. His new body was proving useful already. After taking those potions and enhancing his physical abilities, his reaction speed was even heightened. He grabbed the thug who tried to bash him in the head, pulling him by the collar as if Xiaoyang were catching a badly behaved kid. With his newfound strength, slamming the bastard right into the cold, hard ground was easy peasy. One slam was all it took for the bully to pass out. The guy must have hit his head on the concrete or something. Taking the chance, the remaining bully rushed in with a knife in hand. Without even batting an eye, the zombie apocalypse veteran redirected the weapon and stared down the blonde bully with his unwavering eyes. Xiaoyang didn't even break eye contact while priming his leg for another kick. This time, he kicked the remaining thug on the side of the leg. The force was so powerful that it made the bully fold like an omelet. For additional damage, the fall eventually ended with Blondie's face hitting the floor quite hard. In just a few seconds, the wannabe thugs were dealt with appropriately. The only obstacles remaining in front of him were the catty witches aggravating Shanshan for no good reason. You see, after going through the first grueling apocalypse, Zhang Xiaoyang is now a proponent of equal rights, equal fights. So he smacked that bully witch across the face. She wasn't expecting it either. The strength behind that slap was quite serious. It made her shiver, and her cheek turn red. As for the other bully, since she liked pulling Shanshan's hair so much, Xiaoyang gave the witch a taste of her own medicine. He didn't let go no matter how much she pleaded. With a murderous gaze, he pulled out the knife he got from the blondie and placed it against the girl's neck. Scared of what he might do, the witch was frightened to tears. Every bystander in the area heard a crisp slash and an ear-piercing scream. Xiaoyang didn't even bat an eye. In the first apocalypse, he did a lot of things for the sake of survival, and those instincts have remained with him. The ladies watched in horror at the result of what he had just done. Miss Bully dropped to her knees, seemingly lifeless and powerless. Don't worry, our MC is not that brutal, at least not yet. He just gave the bully a little haircut and humiliated her in front of everyone. Still not learning her lesson, the witch cried out that she wouldn't let Xiaoyang get away after doing her dirty like this. He didn't pay any mind to her empty threats. While glaring down at her pathetic self, he sprinkled the locks of hair on top of her head for maximum disrespect. He did so while telling her that he did her a favor, as long hair would only be a burden in the near future. Everyone was confused by his cryptic words, but he assured them that having short hair might just save the bully's life in the coming days. Xiaoyang turned to Shanshan with close familiarity, telling her that they had to go now, even if she didn't know where. Nevertheless, the old man convinced his granddaughter to board Mr. Jiang's car immediately. In there, her grandpa told her that she wouldn't be coming to school anymore. With a crazy look in his eyes, the old man explained that a massive famine was coming, and survival would have to be their priority. Shanshan wasn't buying it, though. She thought her grandpa just fell for one of those scam calls. Xiaoyang watched the two bicker as the young woman worried that her grandpa had just gotten conned for some cash. The young man was just glad to see Shanshan safe, promising to keep her safe in this new life. Seeing as grandpa's words had no effect, he butted in and confessed that the information about this alleged famine came from him. Come to think of it, she didn't even know who this guy was, driving them to God knows where. Zhang Xiaoyang properly introduced himself, letting Shanshan call him Brother Xiaoyang. She thanked him for standing up to the bastards at school, and he assured her that those guys wouldn't have many days left alive. Now, she was curious if there really was a famine coming so suddenly. He finally fessed up that he just made up the famine story to make it easier for the old man to understand. A famine in modern peaceful times would be borderline impossible. So, he cleared up that what's really coming in the next few days is the apocalypse, the end of modern civilization as they know it. Hearing that would make anyone feel crazy. It's a natural reaction to such a declaration. Looking at the clock, Xiaoyang reckoned that it should be about time to check the news and internet to see the initial signs of the end of times. Pulling her phone out and checking the news, a video of a man reciting some pretty ominous end-of-day stuff appeared front and center. It was a man being detained by authorities in a crowded train station. Some people said it was rabies, and the guy was biting other people. But the man seemed lucid enough to recite some grim stuff about a smog with a strange smell. In the video, the detainee resisted being held down hard enough to break free and bite more people like a dog. It was pretty much chaos from then on. As Xiaoyang stated and expected, the initial signs of the apocalypse were already in full swing. Tomorrow will mark the official first day of the apocalypse. A toxic smog will start to blanket several provinces, including Province B. All kinds of living beings will be affected by this unknown smog. It will come to a point where a significant portion of the population will mutate into mindless zombies roaming the streets, looking for their next prey. As for the other portion that survives the smog, they won't be spared by the cruelty of those zombies hungry for flesh. After dying an agonizing death, the victim will become one of them. Shanshan is part of the new generation, so she should have a general idea of what zombies are like. She does have some ideas based on films and pop culture in general, but it's hard to believe it is happening for real. But when the chaos officially kicks off tomorrow, the day after, or next week, Everyone won't find the idea so unbelievable. Unfortunately, they were caught in traffic when time was of the essence to get back to headquarters. It was so bad that even the emergency lane was blocked and backed up. The old man was starting to freak out as Mr. Jiang just mentioned zombies, and now they're in a stationary position. But Xiaoyang assured him that they should be safe for now. But even if the zombies won't be able to take over everything for a few days, the possibility of a small outbreak nearby would not be impossible. While every car was bumper to bumper, a luxury car sped through the emergency lane, passing everyone. When the traffic moved a little bit, the luxury car took the opportunity to cut Xiaoyang. The bastard was driving so fast and recklessly that Xiaoyang nearly rammed into him had he not braked. He was pissed, and rightfully so. That guy had no concept of turn signals and just cut into the emergency lane like an idiot, endangering everyone. Feeling confrontational, the young man refused to swallow the disrespect he was handed. He didn't let the bastard enter his lane, blocking it off. Even after he deliberately showed that he wasn't letting the bastard in, the luxury car wasn't giving up. Everyone's stuck in the same traffic jam, and reckless drivers don't get a pass. The luxury car pulled up next to Xiaoyang's window and spouted some vile curses, looking like he was the one aggravated in this situation. The old man advised that they should just avoid trouble for now, as the reckless driver seemed wealthy and powerful. Xiaoyang didn't mind that, though. If the bastard tried to step out and cause trouble, he wouldn't hesitate to paint the road with the rich man's blood. They were stuck in that traffic jam for almost an hour, but it fortunately cleared up. Looking at their rear, it seemed like the headaches had not stopped yet, as the luxury car from before was trying to cut in once again. It was deliberately chasing after them. Xiaoyang was really starting to get pissed off now. The rich brat just wouldn't let it go. Whoever that bastard was, he's surely an unhinged person who willingly put his life and vehicle on the line just to be obnoxious on the road. He was tailgating and deliberately taunting them. It's your textbook road rage enjoyer. The old man urged Mr. Jiang to just let it go and not engage any further. Well, the Jiang Xiaoyang of the past might have let this bastard slide, but the apocalypse is due tomorrow. There would be no need to tolerate scumbags like that rich brat anymore. So Xiaoyang played with the road rager for a little bit. He bet on the guy bitching out at the last second, and he came out on top. The rich brat nearly crashed on the hill nearby, and he had the gall to attribute it to the little punk from the traffic. The suited-up bastard immediately dialed traffic police to ask for surveillance footage. He wanted to track down Xiaoyang to show that the people at the top were not to be messed with. By the time the three reached the headquarters, it was already well into the night. As soon as they stepped out of the car, the old man looked at the compound with his mouth wide open in surprise at its scale. Shanshan commented that the whole place seemed a little too much. Xiaoyang told the two to get some rest starting tomorrow, and everything they believed would be turned upside down as the world entered hardcore mode. That's what he said. But he looked pretty chill and comfortable in front of his viewing deck with a coffee in hand first thing in the morning. Shanshan had just woken up and found Xiaoyang nearby. It had been so long since she had a great sleep, and not having morning classes was a liberating feeling. Since she was already up, this would be an excellent time to take her on a tour around the fortress. They fetched Grandpa, and Xiaoyang gave them a tour around the facilities, where all walls were made of some serious reinforced concrete. Each gate wouldn't cave without the use of heavy weaponry, as they were remote-controlled and made of 3-centimeter thick solid steel. Whether it was people or zombies, keeping anything out would be a cinch. He also reminded them that no one other than the three of them would be allowed inside the fortress without Xiaoyang's permission. Shanshan interpreted that as leaving other survivors who managed to reach this place to die outside with the undead. Xiaoyang did not answer outrightly. He just invited them to come to the next spot. He carefully explained that with the apocalypse underway, human nature would become even more unpredictable than it already was. The evil inside people's hearts would be magnified without laws. Having a big heart and compassion would only get them killed down the line. So he led the two to view a spot that he had constructed. It looked like a fenced apartment complex with multiple shipping containers strewn around. He instructed that in the event he wasn't around and survivors came seeking help, they could be housed in this buffer zone as temporary shelter. Without his explicit permission, the ban on other people from the main fortress still stood. The old man concurred. The next stop on the tour would be the food storage. He would also point out which areas of their supply place could be rationed out to other people. Entering the warehouse filled with stacks upon stacks of essential supplies, it seemed like an absurd sight. Xiaoyang turned around, looking at them with intent. He proceeded to activate the mind's eye to check their hostility status after showing them the goods. Fortunately, he saw happy faces on top of their heads. It should be safe to assume that this was a sign of trust. So, he continued with the next showcase from his storage ring, while explaining that weapons were the most important thing in this apocalypse. He handed Shanshan a crossbow and the old man a shotgun. He reminded them to ensure that these weapons remain under their control, never falling into someone else's hands. It was only common sense to do so. Weapon security was a must unless they wanted chaos. While in the middle of the tour, Xiaoyong received a notification regarding a new system task. After reuniting with Meng Shanshan, he was given another mission to reunite with another former comrade named Zhang Qi. This notification came as quite a shock to Xiaoyong. Looking at the city from the viewing deck, he saw an arrow indicating Zhang Qi's location. He was already planning to find his old friends, so this was a nice bonus. Before bolting off to take on the mission, he told the grandpa-granddaughter duo to remember the rules and never think of violating them. When asked where he was going, he entered his car and answered that he would be out to recruit and build up the team. The giant arrow indicating Zhang Qi's location seemed to be pointing at a KTV bar. Inside one of the rooms, a group of friends were having fun drinking and singing karaoke. The silver-haired Zhang Qi drunkenly stumbled out of the room with one of his boys to go to the restroom. After emptying their bladders, the two drunkenly stumbled out into the hallway. Being so inebriated, Zhang Qi accidentally bumped into a girl. It was a light bump, but the girl looked supremely irritated. Not thinking much of it, Zhang Qi immediately apologized. But the girl's escort did not take the whole thing well. Calling Zhang Qi a punk, he kicked the young man indiscriminately. Zhang Qi stumbled into a nearby wall, falling on his ass, and it looked pretty painful. His buddy ran to his side to check if he was okay. He certainly didn't look like it. Glass's buddy had some balls to stand up for his friend, yelling at the violent thug for behaving so aggressively. Not used to people talking back to him, especially in front of his girl, the thug was infuriated. He lifted Glass's buddy by the collar, and the bastard was quite strong. Seeing the situation escalating, Zhang Qi tried his best to get back up and admit that he was at fault, pleading for the thug not to hit his buddy. Fortunately, a KTV staff member was walking around nearby. He was lamenting getting over stomach flu and immediately catching a cold, but the commotion caught his attention. It seemed like fights were quite commonplace in this bar, as drunk people just couldn't keep their hands to themselves. The staffer decided to step in to try and break up the fight, asking both parties to calm down. When the thug turned around, he looked offended to be stopped. He took it as disrespect, as even the KTV's owner would not dare touch his clothes. The heroic staffer was now the target of the thug's anger, so he silently gestured for Zhang Qi and his buddy to hurry up and leave. Bastard thug demanded that the bar boss come out right away, or he would shut the place down. Mr. Staffer tried to de-escalate, but it seemed ineffective as the college boys ran away. Back in karaoke room 3090, the two barged in as if they were being chased by a wild animal. Their other friends were naturally curious as to what was happening and why they were in such a frantic rush. Well, they basically bumped into a drunk thug who threatened to beat them up really badly. They were lucky that one of the staff was quick-witted and kind enough to defuse the commotion. One of their friends stood up, telling them they should have put up a fight as their mechanical engineering class should never back down. He wanted to call other guys from their department to retaliate. Zhang Qi stopped the hothead from doing so, as acting tough and looking for trouble when they had less than a year until graduation would be a stupid move. They should just keep singing, dancing, and celebrating. They did just that. But the trouble continued looking for them in the form of the drunk thug with his whole group. It looked like they beat on the server to find room 3090. The boys were naturally surprised that a group of unknown tough guys had just charged inside. Drunk thug threw the server like a rag doll and pointed at Zhang Qi and his friends, telling his boys to grab everyone. The college boys did not dare resist for fear of escalating the violence even more, so they surrendered. Seeing the fate of the beaten server made them shiver. The tough guy of mechanical engineering taunted the thugs, daring them to let him make one phone call. Grabbing a whiskey bottle, drunk thug stopped the tough guy from talking. He did so by smashing the full bottle in his hand against the tough guy's head. Tough guy Chen Chong's blood and the whiskey mixed as it flowed down to the floor, much to Zhang Qi's worry. Outside the KTV bar, a familiar car just pulled up to the entrance. Zhang Xiaoyong came out of his car with a smile, excited at the thought of seeing one of his old buddies from the first apocalypse. He was amused by how in character, a KTV was for a college student version of Zhang Qi. He entered the premises, guided by the top-notch staff. Even when they faced the horrible end of the world for the first time around, Zhang Qi had always been the type of guy who still had the heart to sing. Chen Chong tried to act tougher than he really was, and all it got him was a painful head wound from a shattered liquor bottle. The thug turned to his lady, feeling full of himself. But she was not amused at all, as Chen Chong was not the one who bumped into her earlier. That was no problem at all since they could just smash Zhang Qi's head open all the same. However, it seemed that Chen Chong was quite resilient. Grabbing a metal ashtray, he fought through the pain to retaliate but was apprehended by the other thugs immediately. His guts both impressed and irritated the head thug. Using the fresh bottle in his hand, he delivered another brutal blow to the tough guy's head. Zhang Qi and his classmates could only watch as one of their friends got trashed not once, but twice. Being the good buddy that he was, he ignored the armed thugs around and charged at the head thug tormenting them. While he and Glasses were bravely standing up for their friend, The remaining cowardly dude trembled in fear. Unfortunately, a 2 versus multiple gangsters situation was a recipe for disaster. But while they were getting beaten up, the injured KTV attendant started groggily standing. Despite the disadvantages in numbers, Zhang Qi actually held on quite well, giving the thugs a lot of trouble. While they were distracted trying to beat one another, the KTV attendant had already started abnormally mutating, losing his sanity. The rabid zombie immediately ran up to where the largest clump of living flesh was, exhibiting extraordinary speed. One unfortunate thug just happened to be the nearest, so the infected attendant took a bite out of his back like it was a medium-rare steak. Still unaware of what was happening, the thug was just annoyed at the dog-like behavior of their first victim. Meanwhile, Zhang Qi's cowardly classmate was losing his mind out of terror instead of backing his friends up. Another thug tried to pull the attendant off his buddy's shoulder, but the bite was way too persistent, and the mutation had enhanced his physical strength. Suddenly, the infected turned around in one swift motion, letting go of one thug's shoulder and transferring the bite over to another thug's arm. The bite was painful, but the more troublesome part was the enhanced physical strength, making it borderline impossible to shake the infected off. At this rate, everyone in the room would probably fall victim to the mutated attendant if a certain someone did not intervene. Zhang Xiaoyang stole the spotlight by grabbing the rabid attendant by the back of its neck and lifting the beast up in the air with a single arm. To neutralize the threat, he turned to the nearest glass wall and smashed the zombie right into it, shattering the glass. Xiaoyang turned to the warring thugs and students, telling everyone to stop what they were doing. His display of swift viciousness was quite effective in demanding their attention. The thugs reckoned that this stranger must be strong as hell since they could not even move the rabid attendant with 2 people teaming up. Head Bastard was quite ineffective at reading the room, redirecting his anger towards the man who had just smashed a rabid zombie with one hand. Ignoring the gangsters, Xiaoyang turned to Zhang Qi to ask if the young man was bitten. Stuttering in confusion, he replied that he was not bitten. None of them had a clue as to what was going on. Without further explanation, Xiaoyang just ordered his old friend from a previous life to come with him. For some reason, Zhang Qi felt compelled to follow, but was stopped by the head thug, who still thought that he was the top dog in this situation. Before another fight could erupt, one of the bitten gangsters started coughing severely while complaining about a severe headache, making his head spin. Xiaoyang could spot the early signs of mutation from a mile away, and this guy was exhibiting every symptom. Aside from the massive bite wound on his shoulder, he also complained about having a runny nose earlier in the day. While still holding the rabid zombie by the neck, Xiaoyang confirmed that the thug was bitten. The signs of rot and infection were already visibly spreading from the wound itself. He was a lock for infection, and with the bite so close to the nervous system, the spread would only accelerate. The thug was bound to mutate sooner rather than later, and they could not afford to deal with 2 rabid zombies in such a closed space. So, Xiaoyang started moving, dragging the resisting zombie, drawing everyone's eyes to his following action. Upon arriving near the door, he chucked the infected attendant inside the restroom. He immediately pulled the sliding door closed, effectively trapping the infected inside. The rabid zombie was quite rowdy, immediately getting up to aggressively bang on the door. Thankfully, zombies in the early days had not yet learned how to open doors. Everyone in the room looked at Xiaoyang with puzzled expressions. With the threat of the rabid zombie effectively neutralized, Xiaoyang's demeanor shifted to an even more aggressive one as he asked Zhang Qi which one of these thugs needed to catch his hands. The young man was still confused as to who Xiaoyang was since they didn't even know each other at this point. Head Bastard, with his bruised ego, charged in, expecting to teach some cocky brat the gangster way, but Xiaoyang just looked at him like he was looking at a harmless kid. Before the head thug could land his pathetic attack, Xiaoyang had already grabbed him by the face, digging his fingers into his skin. Pushing forward until he found a target, Xiaoyang smashed the head thug into the glass table in the middle of the room. The bitten thug with the mortal shoulder wound immediately ran in to avenge his boss. Xiaoyang fixed his stance and landed a quick blow to the gangster's windpipe. With one swift motion, the thug laid flat on his back, his consciousness fading away. Then came the next stage of infection, as the gangster started foaming at the mouth while seemingly having a seizure. His buddy worriedly checked on the guy. One punch should not be enough to put anyone into this bizarre state. Nevertheless, it was an effective show of strength. If anyone else wanted a one-piece combo to go night-night, Xiaoyang would gladly take volunteers. While adjusting his fists for a beatdown, Xiaoyang advised Zhang Qi to take his friends and wait outside the KTV room. They gladly complied, lending their shoulders to the injured Chen Chong and getting out of there as fast as they could. The gangsters wanted to do the same, carrying their injured brothers, who were slowly succumbing to the infection. However, Xiaoyang stood firm at the door, not letting them pass. Head Bastard tried to intimidate him but failed miserably. They must have gotten so drunk that they acted like gods and nearly got his brother Zhang Qi killed. Not wasting any more breath on these lowlifes, Xiaoyang easily pushed the head thug down, infuriating the egomaniac gangster. Afterward, Xiaoyang immediately left, slamming the door in their faces to let nature take its course. Head Bastard began crazily banging on the door, calling Xiaoyang all kinds of names while threatening to skin him alive. Unbeknownst to him, one of his men had already succumbed to the infection. The zombie bite near his nervous system had hastened the process. Upon opening his eyes, they had already turned bloodshot and crimson, with no signs of sanity or control left. The rabid gangster lunged forward to attack his boss, attracted by the banging on the door. Xiaoyang made sure to hold the door handle securely as the rabid gangster gnawed and chewed at his friends. To make matters worse, the zombie attendant locked in the bathroom had also figured out how doors worked. Xiaoyang could hear the carnage from the hallway. Curious, one of the KTV employees hesitantly approached Xiaoyang, and he urgently tasked the employee to get the keys and lock the door, not letting anyone enter. They were also to call the police and paramedics, citing a case of rabies flu inside the room. Hearing the seriousness in the young man's voice and the mention of rabies flu alarmed the employee. He was in a daze, so Xiaoyang had to yell at him a second time to act fast, as they didn't have time to dilly-dally. The KTV room was securely locked from the outside, with the unintelligible grumbles of the rabid gangsters audible from the hallway. As for Zhangqi and friends, Xiaoyang invited them to follow him for now, leaving the KTV employees to deal with the aftermath of what had just transpired. The employee who locked the door couldn't help but be creeped out by the inhuman noises coming from inside. One of his colleagues curiously approached, asking what the chaos was about. The mention of rabies flu would alarm anyone who heard it, and so, they decided to run to the security room and check out the live security footage. As soon as they arrived at the security room, the live feed showed the stuff nightmares are made of. It was a gore fest of rabid monstrosities feasting on their dead friends. The insanity in their eyes was terrifying as they gnawed on flesh and blood. Even the girl was not spared, her face bitten and eaten. This footage certainly lit a fire under the security team to call the cops. Meanwhile, Xiaoyang warned the college friends that the area was not safe anymore and that they must leave as soon as possible. Not sure what to do, they willingly entered Xiaoyang's car, and they went on their way to the off-grid base camp. Zhangqi thanked Xiaoyang for helping them against those thugs. But they still hadn't been properly introduced, so he was a little apprehensive. Zhang Xiaoyang formally introduced himself and lied about the fact that he had been hired by an anonymous employer to protect Zhangqi. The coward of the group curiously asked if the rabies flu was confirmed, as he had seen people debunk the hoax on the internet not too long ago. Xiaoyang simply cited what they had seen back in the KTV room. There was no other logical explanation for it. Glasses fearfully asked if there was any medicine or vaccine against this rabies flu they were talking about. Xiaoyang stared at the boys from the rearview mirror while driving and gave it to them straight. The disaster wouldn't end, and it would only get worse. In other words, they were already in the midst of the apocalypse. Speaking of the apocalypse, they just happened to pass by more blatant evidence of what was happening. At the side of the road, an infected man was chasing after a pedestrian, fearing for his life. The current situation in the city could still be considered just a small outbreak in isolated areas, as the majority of infected people were still in the incubation phase. But sooner rather than later, the epidemic would spiral out of control on a massive scale. If the boys wanted to survive, they had to listen to everything Xiaoyang said from now on. Fearing for their lives and feeling indebted to the reliable stranger, they promised Brother Yang that they would listen to him. Rescuing and gaining Zhangqi's trust finally gave Xiaoyang the pass to his mission, rewarding him with 20 system points. Now was the perfect time to secure more resources, so he was excited to see the new loot boxes in the shop. There was an Apocalypse Farmer box, Armed Deterrence box, and food supply boxes to splurge his points on. He had already seen the Apocalypse Farmer box, so it seemed like he would need to either refresh or buy it to open spots for new stuff. Nevertheless, every one of these boxes seemed useful and was not too expensive. Xiaoyang planned to redeem all of them once he got back to the fortress. Sneakily stealing glances at the college boys, one more tricky problem came to his mind. In their past life, Zhangqi was betrayed by one of his doormates, leading to the deaths of multiple people at the brutal hands of zombies. Zhangqi was the only one who barely survived, but the betrayal changed him fundamentally. As for the traitor who got everyone killed, it should be one of these bozos sitting in Xiaoyang's back seat. On the other side of town, Jing was on a phone call with the man she lovingly referred to as Honey. The witch had been feeling anxious as she was promised some supplies. Things were starting to get crazy in her area, and she was too scared to go to the store herself. The sucker kept on promising that he would bring stuff over as soon as he was able. Suddenly, a knock on her door nearly gave Jing a heart attack. She hung up the phone and slowly approached the entrance with bated breath. Carefully peering through the peephole, she finally saw who was on the other side. She sighed in relief as she let her witch friend Xiaoya in. Xiaoya also felt uneasy when she heard that the old grandpa named Liu from the building's first floor had been taken away earlier today. Taken away by a police car and an ambulance, trying to keep the matter on the low. It made sense as Jing could hear all the chaos from downstairs earlier that morning. The girls were starting to believe that the rabies flu news was not just some scare tactic. As for Li Shuxiang's promised supply delivery, it still had not arrived. Xiaoya had already warned Jing that the greasy Shuxiang couldn't be trusted, but they could at least use Shuxiang to ransack Zhang Xiaoyang's large stockpile of supplies, enough to make a fortune in the middle of the epidemic. The last time Xiaoya failed to seduce the guy and got kicked out by Xiaoyang, she sent one of her simps to keep an eye on him in secret. So she received reports of trucks regularly dropping supplies at that abandoned factory he refurbished. That would only make sense if Xiaoyang somehow knew about the upcoming epidemic early on. And so, the two witches devised a plan to use Shuxiang to ransack the place, taking a cut of Xiaoyang's riches by force. Xiaoyang pulled up to the base camp without encountering any further problems along the way. The boys also got out of the car, taking in the view of what Xiaoyang had impressively built in such a short time. Jiangqi could not hide his excitement and amazement at the unbelievable scale of the base camp. It would be more appropriate to call it a fortress at this point. Xiaoyang just smiled at his old friend's reaction. That's pretty much how everyone reacts at first sight. The noise of their car also prompted the other tenants of the fortress to check things out with their weapons in hand. Grandpa and Shanshan were just glad to see Xiaoyang return in one piece. The young man assured them that he was fine, and called the boys over to introduce them as the new members of the fortress. Well, he only knew Jiangqi, so he just referred to the other boys as Jiangqi's classmates. Grandpa Shengbo and Shanshan cheerfully introduced themselves too, welcoming the newcomers to the safety of the fortress. Then, Xiaoyang tasked Grandpa Shengbo with taking a few guys to show them around the area and explain their rules and regulations in detail. Glasses couldn't help but feel like they had just entered some military base camp. Before touring the place, the coward meekly demanded everyone's attention first. He asked if they could be issued some weapons too, so they could contribute to defending the massive place. Xiaoyang shot him a glare of suspicion. They had not been here for a whole hour, and the guy was already requesting to be armed. Wasn't that sussy? Glasses whispered to Yiming, the coward, to stop being so eager to get weapons as they were the newcomers here. Demanding something like that requires a degree of trust first. To shut Yiming's demands, Xiaoyang promised that everyone would get weapons in a few more days. Also, Chen Chong's head injuries were severe, so he should be checked in the medical room first for treatment. After a few hours, the boys finally managed to shower off the booze and the tension from the life or death scenario. Yiming turned to Glasses and annoyingly asked why he had stopped his demands for weapons earlier. He reckoned that if Glasses had not intervened, maybe they would have guns in their hands right about now. The audacity of this coward to stand up and make a speech about how it would be best to be protected given the current situation was laughable. Without firearms, he even compared being in this fortress to being under house arrest. Thankfully, Glasses had some common sense and gratitude for being saved from the jaws of the infected. Yiming continued trying to sow a sense of distrust among his classmates, putting Xiaoyang's background into question as the guy only claimed that he was hired by an anonymous client for protection. Yiming rightfully poked holes in the story, as it did not seem to make any sense. He gritted his teeth and brought up Chen Chong's treatment too. Xiaoyang promised to monitor their buddy's injury, but the medical room had more security features than a prison cell. Yiming spouted the poisonous idea that Xiaoyang might be conspiring to harvest their friend's organs in that sterile room without them knowing. So, he was determined to recruit more dumbasses to his cause and strike first against their savior. Glasses heavily opposed the idea, not wanting to betray Xiaoyang after he had taken them to safety. Yiming asserted that he would rather betray the world than let the world betray him. So, he wanted to take over the fortress and seize control of the entire area. Besides them and that Xiaoyang guy, there was only an old man and a young girl. Yiming reckoned that if Xiaoyang went away, they could capture the old man and the girl. The girl just happened to be pretty cute too, and Yiming wanted some of that. The boys just looked at him with disgust and contempt. Fortunately, Glasses and Jiangqi were not that type of guy. Realizing that they weren't biting on his plan, Yiming waved his hand and laughed, playing off what he had just said as a joke that should not be taken seriously. Jiangqi naively accepted that half-assed excuse at face value. The apocalypse had not even gotten into full swing yet, and Yiming was already scheming about degenerate lawless deeds. Glasses also added that if Xiaoyang wanted to harvest their organs, they would have been helplessly locked up by now. As the other two exited the showers, Yiming deemed them not worthy of conspiring with. He believed that in chaotic times, one must be ruthless. Even though he trembled at the sight of blood while his buddies were throwing hands with gangsters earlier, Yiming wanted to turn them into lackeys for life once he took over. Grandpa Shengbo reported that Jiangqi and the others had started settling in. As for the injured Chen Chong, he was also in recovery. As instructed, all doors and windows had also been secured. Xiaoyang thanked Grandpa Shengbo and Shanshan for their hard work, telling them to get some rest, for they didn't know what tomorrow would be. Before they went, Xiaoyang also warned the two to keep a close eye on Zhang Qi's other two classmates, citing that he felt some traitorous vibes among them. In the dead of night, Xiaoyang went straight to his warehouse to settle some stuff. He opened the system's item shop and gave the offerings a thorough inspection. Clicking on all of the offered products, he successfully redeemed the Level 1 Apocalypse Farmer box for 2 points, the Level 1 Food Supply box for 5 points, and the Level 1 Armed Deterrent Supply box for another 5 points, leaving him with 8 points remaining. The Apocalypse Farmer box contained 50 corn seeds. The Food Supply box awarded him with 200 kilograms of starch sausage, 100 kilograms of pre-cooked braised pork with preserved vegetables, and 50 boxes of pickled cabbage noodles. As for the Armed Deterrent box, it contained a whopping 1,500 rounds of 9mm ammunition. He dumped the rewards from the boxes in one pile. Seeing the sheer size of the pile was quite impressive in and of itself. It was not as good as spending money freely now in the coming resource-scarce apocalypse, but supplies are supplies. They're invaluable. The next day came, and the morning started with multiple vehicles pulling up to the gate of the fortress. They confirmed that they had the correct address and started setting up their plan. What came out of the vehicles were multiple armed men sporting blades, as a man wearing a suit finished his phone call. After hanging up, the suit ordered his men to break the gate down with all their might. The stupid army started bashing the steel gates with their bats and tried to kick them down with their feet. After a few minutes of trying to no avail, they complained that the door was too thick, and they would not be able to break it down with the equipment they brought. Mr. Suit felt infuriated. He came here expecting to burst through the door of a normal house, only to get stopped at the entrance. So he ordered his men to bring out the big guns, and they hurriedly carried off wooden crates filled with their secret weapons. Instead of explosives or high-caliber guns, the contents of the crates were actually multiple wine bottles. The stupid army fashioned them into handy Molotov cocktails and started chucking them over the gates. The rain of fire just landed in the yard, not even reaching the apartment complex on the other side. Still, the Molotov cocktails caused quite a stir as they burned high and bright first thing in the morning. After blindly tossing the fiery wine bottles all over the place, some had finally managed to hit the roof of the outer apartment complex. Shanshan, Zhang Qi, and the others finally noticed what was happening and came out with fire extinguishers and buckets of water in hand. Xiaoyang had already warned them about something like this. The disaster had not fully hit yet, and extreme situations were already unfolding. While the youngsters dealt with the fire, Xiaoyang and Grandpa Shengbo emerged from the warehouse with an assault rifle and a shotgun, respectively. They went straight to the watchtower to get a visual of the villains causing chaos and looking for trouble outside the gate. Upon arriving at the top, Grandpa Shengbo commented that the guy in the suit and the car at the forefront seemed awfully familiar. If he remembered correctly, it was the guy who had a road rage incident with them on the highway a few days ago. One of the thugs finally noticed someone standing on the watchtower from afar. He immediately notified his boss that the one they were looking for had finally shown his face. The little punk who had dared to provoke him on the road. Mr. Suit screamed and cursed at the top of his lungs, making sure that his sentiments and insults would be heard from way up the tower. He threatened to burn the doghouse down if Xiaoyang didn't come out. The young man calmly responded by giving Mr. Suit and his lackeys 5 minutes to get the hell out of his property or else. These gangsters did not respond well to threats. They just heard a brat telling them to piss off, which got them riled up. The time for words had passed, and they would rather bring out 2 more crates of Molotov cocktails to do the talking. Suddenly, Xiaoyang received a new task from his system. While Grandpa Shengbo stressed over whether they should fire a warning shot or something, Xiaoyang was busy reading his new mission. The task demanded that the threats be eliminated as quickly as possible for 10 points. Seeing the reward, Xiaoyang immediately abandoned the idea of warning shots. These intruders were clearly criminal gangsters. Order in society hadn't broken down yet, and they were already committing heinous crimes. They could not care less if someone got burned to death by their stunt. Xiaoyang believed that leaving scum alive during the apocalypse would only harm more innocent people in the long run, even endangering them. So he started aiming. Without hesitation, the young man pulled the trigger, and his bullet went for the first blood. The first hit landed on Mr. Suit's arms, stunning him and rendering him speechless and terrified. The agonized scream of their boss as he clutched his severed arm made the thugs realize that they must have messed with the wrong people. Xiaoyang, still cool as a cucumber, was actually frustrated that he missed a supposedly sure kill shot. He must have gotten rusty after reliving a peaceful life for too long. The thugs saw the assault rifle in his hands and hurriedly retreated to the cover of their vehicles. The first one to run was the boss, but Xiaoyang was the type of guy who obsessively follows through once he gets started. Aiming more accurately this time, he began picking off the retreating thugs one by one. They rained fire on his property, so he rained lead on their asses, chests, and heads. It was a slaughter. The boss must have felt all the adrenaline in his body pumping so hard that he managed to reach one of the vehicles for cover. As soon as he got inside, he ordered the driver to get the hell out of this place, not minding the bleeding stump he used to call his arm. Grandpa Shengbo worriedly looked at the escaping car, but this was no cause for concern. This is precisely why Xiaoyong grabbed the automatic rifle out of the armory. Carefully aiming at the retreating vehicle, he tracked their movement while continuously emptying magazine after magazine of high-caliber bullets, piercing through. Grandpa watched as the young man continuously aimed, fired, emptied his load, and reloaded without a single wasted motion. The way the kid hip-fired and reloaded was so smooth that even during his military service, Grandpa Shengbo had never seen someone so efficient. After emptying a few more magazines, things finally quieted down in the vicinity of the fortress. The fires had also been successfully extinguished. Corpses of thugs littered the road leading directly to the fortress gate. The getaway vehicle was busted and broke down. Everyone inside was riddled with bullets. Xiaoyong nonchalantly ordered Grandpa Shengbo to call Zhang Qi and his buddies to come out and clean up the dead gangsters at the front door. On second thought, there might be a better way to make use of this little incident. Since it's still the early days of the apocalypse, maybe he could let the corpses below mutate into zombies and use them as practical targets to develop Zhang Qi and Shanshan's combat prowess. So, he told Grandpa to ignore his previous command and leave the thugs lying dead in the middle of the road for his more extensive plans for the future. Not far from the fortress, another batch of cars and vans drove closer and closer. Li Shuqiang was inside one of the white cars, impatiently inquiring whether they were close to the site or not. Kuijing put on her cute, playful voice and cheerfully responded that they should arrive after the next intersection. Xiaoya was sitting with her in the back seat. She actually felt irritated by the cutesy act that Kuijing always performed when this deadbeat Shuqiang was around. A witch knows when another witch is playing the game. Upon reaching the outskirts of the fortress, they pulled up, and Kuijing told Shuqiang to wait while she made her way inside. As soon as Kuijing got out of the car, she tried to rope her friend into her scheme too. She claimed that Xiaoya was the only one who knew what factory Xiaoyang was holed up in. Not wanting to get out of the car, Xiaoya claimed that it was the factory up ahead, which was pretty hard to miss. Besides, her shoes were not fit for walking too far. But Kuijing was quite persistent. She even went as far as dragging her friend out of the car, ignoring her pleas to even get her phone. Ultimately, Xiaoya was forced to tag along with her witchy friend, even though she really did not want to get involved any further. Back in the car, Li Shuqiang called his boys to get ready at any moment. He would take the lead, and as soon as his car started, the boys in the van were to follow. The vans were packed with a mix of young men and veteran gangsters alike, ready to invade the fortress even though they did not know what they were walking into. Xiaoya complained that she did not want to get dragged into this mess. But Kuijing could see through her sly moves, thinking that Xiaoya was making a move on her gangster sugar daddy. They had schemed and scammed together for far too long not to know every trick in the book. But she got it all wrong. Xiaoya actually dressed up and dolled up in hopes of hooking the loser, Zhang Xiaoyong, since Kuijing was already compromised with her affairs. Walking up to the gate, the girls finally noticed the grisly scene up ahead. The road was filled with corpses with bullet wounds throughout their bodies, so it was fair to assume that they died from a shootout. Xiaoya was deathly scared, urging Kuijing to just go back and abandon the plan. Judging by the blood, it seemed like the corpses had been there for a while now. Kuijing reckoned that these were two groups fighting over Zhang Xiaoyong's supplies. If these hardened criminals died in the process, then it would be safe to assume that loser Xiaoyong probably did not make it out alive too. It didn't really matter if he died, they just needed the priceless supplies. Xiaoya, being the voice of reason, wanted to let Li Shuqiang and his boys handle this mess, but Kuijing wanted to sneak over and see if the factory gate was locked. Unbeknownst to the girls, the gangster corpses had already started mutating with the inherent virus in their system. Despite the piles of corpses littering the road, the conniving witches still had the guts to go up to the door to enact their plan. Xiaoya could not see a way to open the locks as the gates were sealed to the utmost tightness. Even the view of the inside compound was blocked. At least this should mean that Xiaoyong was safe and not vulnerable to getting scammed. Their fruitless effort to enter the facility came to a halt when someone called them out from the outpost near the entrance. It was Shanshan. Putting on a tough front, she aggressively asked the ladies how they had found this place. Xiaoya started talking gently as if she were an old friend while telling the gate guard that the two of them were friends of Xiaoyong. Kuijing even boldly claimed that she was his girlfriend. To make sure of what was happening, Shanshan turned around and informed Xiaoyong that there were two witches outside the gate, with one of them claiming to be a girlfriend. As soon as Shanshan vanished from the outpost, Kuijing immediately started accusing her ex of changing his attitude because of a new younger girl. But Xiaoya knew that they couldn't afford to cause chaos so soon. Also, the woman stationed at the gate had a crossbow equipped. The witches were confident that the deadbeat Li Shuxiang would be able to pull the heist off. He brought a few handguns, and all the girls had to do was get the gates open. As soon as Xiaoyang came to the watchtower and saw the two worst women in his life, his fury was palpable. Secretly, he used his mind's eye to appraise their status. Xiaoya quickly put on a performance, telling him that they were just concerned and checking on Xiaoyang. Things had been so chaotic, so she tried to appeal to his pity, all while fostering negative emotions underneath, as seen by the mind's eye's vision. Of course, Xiaoyang did not bite. He was not as clueless as he had been before. He correctly realized that the scumbag, Li Shuxiang, must be nearby, waiting for a signal. He even taunted the ladies by asking them what kind of weapons they had brought. The foxy duo was speechless. They had not even gotten into the compound, and their plan was already figured out. To make matters worse, Xiaoyang started raining bullets on the spot they were standing on, making them dance in fear for their lives. While they were calling him crazy for being so trigger-happy, Zhang Xiaoyang just looked down at them as he emptied a magazine. Xiaoya was naturally scared of the firearm and wanted to take a calmer and non-provocative approach, but Jing was too hell-bent on treating her ex like a spineless simp, which was all she ever knew. But they were mistaken if they thought Xiaoyang would just gun them to death in front of the gate. That would be too easy a death for evil people. What he had in store for them was gorier and more intense, something grimmier and bone-chilling. The groans of the undead made their presence known. Behind the ladies, the army of gangsters turned zombies had started reanimating at once. In these early days, they still referred to this phenomenon as the rabies flu. Zhang Xiaoyang watched all of this unfold from the comfort of his watchtower. He could not take his eyes off the much-needed demise of these two witches at the hands of zombies. Leading the zombie pack was still the cowardly suit guy. They might be undead now, but he still wanted the spotlight. The first three that reached the gate area dove in with their whole bodies, desperate to get a bite of fresh flesh. The ladies managed to avoid the monsters. Halfway through their frantic run, Li Shuxiang started hearing their voices urgently calling his name as if their lives depended on it. Well, that was because it did. Behind the girls were the aggressively rabid undead. With the intensity of the chase, it would only be a matter of time before the zombies caught up. Shuxiang looked out of his car's window and saw the rabies flu people chasing after the girls. It freaked him out. In fact, it freaked him out so much that he started ordering his men to turn around as quickly as possible and drive away from the infected. Shuxiang's gang quickly did what was ordered and hurriedly pulled away from the commotion, leaving the girls behind to their own devices. Jing's stamina and speed were subpar, and she was on the verge of being turned into a healthy carnivorous lunch. But she refused to die a gruesome death. Without an iota of hesitation, Jing threw her purse forward, targeting the much faster Xiaoyang while cursing her name. The straps of the purse coiled around the girl's ankle, and it was literally downhill from then on. She tripped and fell face first on the pavement, injuring her whole body in the process and stifling her escape. As soon as she was knocked down, the zombies automatically changed their targets to the helplessly knocked down Xiaoya. They got their hands on her, and the teeth quickly followed. It was a hungry bloodbath in the middle of daylight. Xiaoya had her flesh torn off in multiple parts, but the pain of it was secondary to the pain of being blatantly betrayed by Jing. Her eyes were bloodshot with anger. While the zombies were distracted, the heartless witch continued running forward, actively avoiding looking back at her best friend getting eaten. She kept chanting that Xiaoya deserved what she got too. Meanwhile, Xiaoyang was just watching from above, unfazed as the system rewarded him 10 more points for neutralizing an ordinary threat. The innocent Shanshan was distraught. A new mission was also added. Its objective was to clean up the streets and wipe out the infected monsters wandering outside the base. Shanshan was terrified of zombies. To see those dead guys in front of their gate get up and hunt flesh like an animal out of nowhere was horrific. Xiaoyang explained that this was the true beginning. With the air filled with staggering amounts of infectious alien sources, the dead, when exposed outdoors, would quickly mutate. Even the injured and those with weaker bodies had a high risk of mutation. He was done watching the clown show on the road. Xiaoyang wanted to get everyone together and have an urgent meeting. It did not take too long to assemble everyone. With all the members of the fortress present, Xiaoyang addressed the room. He believed that in the next 2 days, they must stay indoors as much as possible with the windows and doors sealed shut. That way, they could let their bodies gradually adapt to the infection to greatly reduce the risk of mutation. Jiangqi brought up their brother Chong, who was currently unconscious inside the urgent care room. Speaking of Chong, his head wound had gotten better after the basic procedures, but he still had not regained consciousness. Instead of his mind going back, it was starting to look like the infection inside his body was going to win. He subconsciously resisted the spread of mutation, but it was far too fast and intense as it visibly rampaged through his veins. In the city, pandemonium had officially descended as chaos and violence filled the streets. Some people were trying to get away, some people just wanted to let loose, and some were eating each other. To quote an old man hiding in his home while looking out his window, it was complete chaos out there. He planned to go to the warehouse as soon as the sun went down to bring some supplies back to his family. In the meantime, his wife and kid must never open the door for anyone except him. Speaking of the door, there was someone banging on it from outside. After successive loud knocks, tension filled the room as the family wondered just what in the world was on the other side of their door. Dad warned his wife and kid to stay quiet while he checked on the situation outside. Before opening the door, he grabbed a golf club from his kit and acted with utmost caution. As soon as he heard a voice call him Brother Jay, the old man relaxed a little. He sighed in relief as he opened the door to a buddy of his named Young Tao, or at least that was what he thought. Brother Ji steadily pulled the handle to open the door and let the visitors in. But he did not have to do that, as the guests just let themselves in with a kick that sent Jay's frail body flying across the room. What he thought was a friend was actually much worse than zombies. It was a whole gang of pissed-off thugs upset with him. The poor guy didn't even get the chance to use his golf club before getting his face stuck to the floor as his former colleagues surrounded him. He tried his best to look Yang Tao in the eyes, reminding the thug of how well he had been treated in the organization. Yang Tao begged to differ, though. He was never treated well by this arrogant Jay. In his eyes, Yang Tao was just a replaceable lackey. Though he was treated like that, Z reminded him that he had earned good money, enough to put a down payment on a house. But while he made enough for a down payment, Brother Zhe earned enough to buy several houses. But enough talk about bad blood. The thugs came all the way out here for some warehouse keys and an address. She gritted his teeth in frustration. He was in no position to negotiate with these thugs at all. Seeing as he was still being stubborn, Yang Tao slowly made his way to where the wife and kid were standing. He pulled the wife by the hair and dared Zai to look at the cruelty. The little kid's instincts kicked in, and he charged at the strange man hurting his mom. Given the difference in size and strength, all the kid could do was bite the thug while tears of fear streamed down his face. Not only was it ineffective, but it also earned him a crisp slap courtesy of Yang Tao. Seeing his family getting pushed around, Brother Zhe angrily dared Yang Tao to come at him instead of his wife and kid. Yang Tao assured him that the mom and the boy wouldn't be harmed any more than they had been as long as Ji cooperated willingly and took them to the warehouse. And so, the group rolled out with a hostage in tow. It did not take them too long to reach the so-called warehouse. They hurriedly opened the mechanical door to reveal its contents. In front of them were a handful of scattered supply boxes, far from the volume that the thugs were expecting to harvest. Well, that was because they had sold almost everything, even near-expiry food, to a big client. Thinking of Jiang Xiaoyang, their big spender, floated some ideas into Yang Tao's head. This dilemma could easily be resolved by taking over the supplies that Jiang Xiaoyang had stockpiled in that factory. If they could do that, they would be set for life. Brother Zai advised against such a reckless idea. When he was delivering goods back and forth, he had accidentally seen a young man carrying a gun. That also led him to believe that Xiaoyang must have somehow gotten wind of the disaster ahead of time. Yang Tao smiled slyly as he did not need to worry about those said guns. It was up to Brother Zai to deal with it after all. Confused, the old man asked the thug what he meant by that. Well, his task was simple. Take Jiang Xiaoyang's supplies in return for the safety of his wife and son. Yang Tao called it a fair trade. Brother Zai was stuck between a rock and a hard place, clueless as to how to get his family and himself out of this mess. Back in the impenetrable fortress of our hero, things had been a lot quieter after all the pathetic attempts at invasion. Everyone was assembled in the urgent care area to address their biggest problem at hand together. In front of them was Chen Chong, who had officially succumbed to the infection after losing consciousness for several days. He finally woke up, but his mind was not there anymore. His classmates knew what was going on, and they shed tears of grief for the loss of a brave and good friend. Almost all of them were crying, except for Yiming. Instead of mourning his friend like the others, Yiming boldly proclaimed that they should kill Chen Chong as soon as possible. Xiaoyang turned his head to look at the brazen young man, and Yiming straightened his back. Zhang Qi also looked at Yiming with disgust and disappointment for suggesting doing something so inhumane to their longtime friend. But he argued that their buddy was already dead. If they didn't finish off his zombified corpse and he somehow broke free, then everyone's lives would be the ones in danger. Xiaoyang, ever the pragmatist, agreed with the heartless suggestion. As far as he knew, there was almost no chance of recovery once someone had turned. Slowly, he reached for his combat knife and unsheathed the blade. Instead of doing the dirty work himself, he presented the blade to the cowardly Yiming, making the student recoil in fright. Xiaoyang's rationale was simple. Since this guy suggested the execution, he should be the one to deal the killing blow and stop their buddy's suffering. Yiming struggled to take the knife. Every fiber of his being was making it impossible to overcome his cowardice. Xiaoyang added that this kid had been demanding a weapon since day one. Now, he could have a weapon as long as he put his friend out of misery. A few more seconds later, a different hand took the knife out of Xiaoyang's hand. Jiang Qi decided to swallow his conscience, quickly adapting to the new facts of life as he took the knife. Instead of the useless coward, he would gladly play the tough role of executioner to a good friend. Jiang Qi took the knife from Xiaoyang while taking a big, empty gulp. He had never been in such a complicated situation before. Xiaoyang asked him if he was sure about going through with it. If everything said was a lie, making a move right now would officially make him a murderer. But Jiang Qi had already made up his mind and heart. He trusted Brother Yang even if they had just met. Xiaoyang smiled, almost as if he knew that only someone like Jiang Qi would reply in such a way. So he gave his green light to finish the zombie off. Jiang Qi walked to the bedside and took a minute to look at his friend's condition. With tears forming in his eyes, he raised the knife above his head and aimed it at Chen Chong's flesh. He fully intended to cut the throat but was stopped in the nick of time. A few more inches and blood would be spewing all over the place. All of Jiang Qi's force and emotion were at the tip of that knife, but Xiaoyang decided to intervene at the last second. Confused, the student looked to his brother for the answer as to why he stopped the process. The answer was simple. The system gave Xiaoyang a curious assessment. For now, he ordered everyone to head out as they had something special in their hands. A zombie that still had its uses. That was because Chen Chong had transformed into a rare mutated variant. This discovery was massive. Everyone left the urgent care unit and went on to do their own things inside the fortress. The only ones left in the room were Xiaoyang and the mutated zombie desperately trying to get a bite of his fleshy meat. Chen Chong was behaving exceedingly aggressively. One look at his veins popping out with an ominous color would give anyone a nightmare. Not Xiaoyang, though. He stared at the mutated zombie face to face while excitedly telling it that it would have to accomplish an important task. Outside, the sun was shining and the clouds were few and far between. Near the fortress, on the outskirts of town, a car was swerving left and right, struggling to get to its destination with no other vehicles on the road. This wonky car eventually hit a lamppost due to poor driving, rendering it useless. Brother Z came out of the car while scratching his head in defeat. His rotten luck had really cost him a car before reaching his destination. Thankfully, the factory was just a walking distance from where he got off, so at least he was almost there now. His calm attitude quickly shifted to fright as soon as one of the gangster zombie stragglers attacked after being attracted to the noise he made. Zhe foolishly and instinctively covered his body with his arm, letting the zombie take a decent chunk of his flesh in one deep and raw bite. He hurriedly pushed the mindless monster away, his left arm bleeding from the bite wound. As soon as the zombie got back up, Brother Zay ran back to the wrecked car on the side of the road. What he was looking for was the crowbar he had prepared as a weapon in advance. It might help, but is that really all you've got? His anger and the adrenaline pumping through his veins gave him the strength to bash the monster right across the face with that simple crowbar. After knocking the overeager zombie down, Z continued bashing its skull repeatedly, long after it had stopped moving altogether. Dealing with one of these bastards had cost him a lot of stamina, and standing in the open while more zombies marched to his position was not a good game plan. He couldn't linger here. So, Zhe walked closer to the factory while his body uncontrollably shivered. It must have been the virus that was starting its rampage inside his body because of that bite. The front gate of the fortress was filled with stationary zombies waiting for their next prey and conserving energy. To avoid all that trouble, Xiaoyang quietly opened the side door for today's mission. Behind him was the rest of the crew, equipped with their preferred weapons. Most of them carried melee weaponry. Shanshan complained that moving felt uncomfortable and cumbersome with all the stuff strapped to their bodies in various places. Xiaoyang explained that zombies are irrational beings with explosive power and energy. With the team's current individual combat experience, they were still too likely to get hurt and had to wear protective gear. He promised that they could take it off once they became a bit more experienced. The crew quietly sneaked their way around the complex while sticking close to the wall so they wouldn't get spotted right away. At the vanguard, Xiaoyang saw the first zombie on their way and warned his team to get ready now that they had entered a zombie's perception range. The beast turned its ugly head around, displaying its bloody, decaying teeth as the team prepared for battle. As the enemy rushed in, Xiaoyang gave his trainees one more reminder to remember their training. They must watch each other's backs and keep their distance. Xiaoyang showed everyone his impressive evasion technique as he avoided a direct takedown breezily. In fact, he was composed and calm enough to give the team a lesson in the middle of dodging. The moment a zombie misses its attack, survivors must take the chance. They must be quick and aim for the temple or the back of the neck. Glasses was the first to move out of instinct, totally ignoring Xiaoyang's advice on where to aim while raising his blade. Ultimately, his attack landed as a clean hit. The blade of his machete was stuck between the zombie's slightly split head. It might have stunned the zombie, but attacking the head directly also made the blade reverberate and hurt his hand greatly. The skull is the hardest part of the head. Attacking it with a melee weapon would only make their hands go numb, as demonstrated by glasses. After a brief moment of being stunned, the zombie regained its ferocity and attacked again, desperately itching for a bite of the student's flesh. Fortunately, Glasses had enough presence of mind to use his blade for defense, trapping the zombie's teeth on the edge while he hurriedly called for everyone's help. Xiaoyang praised the young man for coming up with a perfect defense and called Zhang Qi to snap out and help his teammate in need. Zhang Qi's expression looked equally determined and calm as he repositioned his body behind the zombie while aiming his bat at the back of its neck. As soon as his wooden bat made contact with the neck, a vicious cracking sound could be heard. Xiaoyang was pleased with the results of their first real training. He also told them that one hit would not be enough at this point, so everyone contributed to beating the zombie to death once it was down. Zhang Qi eagerly turned to his brother Yang, excitedly looking for validation for their successful hit. Xiaoyang just smirked at the guy. Behind him, another overly aggressive zombie had come into view, snarling and charging in with a hunger for human meat. Zhang Qi's face crumpled into a concerned look, thinking that his brother was about to get sneak attacked by a mindless corpse. It jumped forward like a fish out of water, its eyes fixated on getting a huge chunk from Xiaoyang's turned shoulder. Instead of a tragic bite, the crew saw Xiaoyang turn around and grab the zombie by its head like a toy. He made sure to shove the mouth away from his body while the zombie struggled with all its might to no avail. Xiaoyang reminded everyone to follow his example and never let their guard down when it comes to observing their surroundings. Zhang Qi took the lesson to heart. The others were just impressed with how proficient Xiaoyang was with just his bare hands. Meanwhile, Brother Zhe was still fighting through his bite wound and slowly inching closer to the factory's gate. From his hiding spot, he could see more crazed mutants wandering around the complex. He was starting to think that Zhang Xiaoyang might have met his end already. But now, he heard intelligible conversations at the side of the outer wall. He recognized Xiaoyang's face and came a bit closer to get a better look. He used the van in the lot as a cover. Peeking through the van, he saw Xiaoyang and a crew of strangers hunting crazed mutants, brutally bashing one's head in with every hit. Unbeknownst to the desperate gangster, something was lurking under the van that he thought was safe. It was none other than Xiaoya, or at least what was left of her. She might have pulled up with so much makeup that even a zombie infection did not change her face that much. She desperately reached for Brother Zhe's foot, clinging and refusing to let go. Her sudden grab caused Zhi to fall on his ass, scared of whatever was crawling under the vehicle. When he finally got a look at what tugged on his leg, his eyes widened in fear. Xiaoya opened her torn-apart mouth, her throat producing a guttural roar, and her clothes were tattered. This might be game over for the old man before he even got started. She was caught off guard and had no time to do anything with the zombie version of Xiaoya. The only thing he could do was to ask for help. He was about to say goodbye to his life when he heard a gunshot. Some stranger took pity on him and saved him. And it was our hero Xiaoyang. Now the zombie Xiaoya was headless not only in a metaphorical sense. She was only left to throw the corpse away from him in disgust. Xiaoyang was surprised to see him here and immediately inquired what he was doing here. Ji was in no hurry to confess, and like all his past fake friends, he started to pretend that he was happy to see our hero alive amidst all the madness going on around him. But as soon as he got closer, Xiaoyang noticed a bite on his arm. Ji himself, under the effects of adrenaline and shock, didn't notice it. But Xiaoyang pointed it out clearly with the muzzle of his automatic rifle and ordered him not to come closer. At that moment, Ji realized that it was all over for him. But he was not going to give up for the sake of his family and asked Xiaoyang not to shoot yet and to listen to his request. Our hero was ready to listen to him, but on the condition that he would not come any closer. She grabbed this last chance to help his family. He knew he was already infected, and it wouldn't be half a day before he would turn into one of those crazy mutant zombies. But he had one last request for Xiaoyang. That bastard Yang Tao had kidnapped his wife and son and was now using them for blackmail to force Zhe to find a way to infiltrate Xiaoyang's base and seize all his resources. She admits that he's not a noble man himself, but even he's never done anything so terribly evil in his entire life, let alone his innocent wife and son. Zhe feared more than death that those animals with Yang Tao in charge would not spare his wife and son. Their fate would be worse than his own after he turned into a zombie. So Zhi just begged our hero to take care of them, at least because he helped Xiaoyang stockpile supplies. Xiaoyang knew this greedy bastard well and that he had helped him only for his own benefit back then. But he had to admit that Zhi had saved him a lot of time. Xiaoyang thought about what was the right thing for him to do. There is still plenty of room in his fortress, and the number of men is much higher than women, breaking the balance. Fortunately, he didn't have to hesitate for long. A notification came from the system about a new mission. The mission was called Entrust the Wife and Child, and to fulfill it, he had to rescue Zhe's wife and child. He could get even more points for this task than for clearing up the zombies near the fortress. Now Xiaoyong agreed to take care of Jay's family without a doubt. The former thug just couldn't believe such kindness and cried. He even bowed, realizing that he could not repay such kindness in this life. But he promised that in the next life he would be Xiaoyong's faithful servant. Now he had one last request for our hero, to do it. Xiaoyong pretended not to understand what Jay wanted him to do. But it was simple. So he didn't want to turn into one of those crazy zombies and put his family's life in danger. So he asked Xiaoyong to finish him off now. But Xiaoyong was in no hurry to act. Unlike Zhe, he knew how this apocalyptic world worked. Instead, he asked Shanshan to bring here a bicycle from the warehouse for Zhe. And he advised Zhe himself to get as far away from people as possible, to a place as isolated as possible. Of course, Zhe didn't understand why Xiaoyong was doing all this, but he didn't need to know. He didn't have much time left, and all he had to do now was to do as Xiaoyong told him. For someone who was going to save his family, Zhe was ready to do anything, and there was no limit to his gratitude. As soon as he got the bicycle, he rushed away with all his might. He had less and less time. The zombie virus was getting deeper and deeper, but thoughts of his wife and son kept him moving forward. Meanwhile, Xiaoyong and his team had finished clearing out the zombies near the base, and gathering them all in a pile poured fuel on them and set them on fire. It was a hard day, and they were all exhausted, but now the burned zombies will never come back to life. Now Xiaoyong's team had enough experience and strength to kill one zombie with a melee weapon without taking damage, and Xiaoyong has certainly completed the task with more points. However, when it comes to small groups of zombies or even hordes, our hero's team is definitely not ready to deal with them yet. Xiaoyong advised them all to hurry back to the fortress. There, he led them all to the armored gate of the warehouse, and addressed Shengbo with an important task. He would have to keep the keys to the weapons warehouse in his possession while Xiaoyong went into the city that night. The safety of the fortress would be in his hands. Shengbo accepted such a crucial task. However, he was wondering what our hero was going to do at night by himself in a city that had turned into a complete madhouse. His old friends were also not going to let him go alone and wanted to go with him. Yiming only was not thrilled with such an idea. Xiaoyong quickly calmed their enthusiasm. There was no reason for them to go, after all. They were not at all prepared for such dangers. If they went, they would only become a burden. It was much more important to protect the fortress and not let anyone inside, and in this he counted on Shengbo. For the operation to rescue Jay's wife and son, Xiaoyong took a solid supply of melee and ranged weapons in his car. He was also going to buy more loot boxes from the system store, but it was empty. Xiaoyong was frustrated that the store was updating so slowly because he needed the improvements right now, so he had to manually update the store to prepare for the tough mission. There were now 3 new supply boxes: Black Tech, Life-Saving, and Armed Deterrent. The Black Tech supply box was the most expensive. But the most annoying thing is that the price of manually upgrading the store has increased to 4 points, so he had to be careful with that, because every time the price of upgrading would go up. Fortunately, the boxes in the store were very cool, and our hero had just enough points to buy the most expensive one. However, after buying it, Xiaoyong has only 6 points left. As soon as the box was opened, a blinding light shone in the car. Xiaoyong was rewarded with a physical enhancement serum that could increase his strength by 5 points. Xiaoyong tried to recover after being blinded by such a sudden flashbang, but all his displeasure immediately disappeared when he realized what he had received. A bonus of 5 points of strength at once was not bad, so he used it right away. The process was a bit painful, but the result was worth it. Along with this boost, Xiaoyong's strength score rose to 13 points, which was about 2.6 times stronger than a normal person. Meanwhile, at Jay's home, things were not calm. His wife was trying to comfort her son, telling him that there was nothing to worry about because their daddy would take care of everything. But the thugs led by Yang Tao thought otherwise. They got tired of waiting and burst into the room. The terrified wife asked in horror what they were going to do, but the answer was obvious. Yang Tao was going to have fun. We all know what the dirty bastard was going to do. And the saddest part was that no one in this apocalyptic world was going to come to her screams. At least that's what Yang Tao was counting on. We pick up the story with these thugs tearing Xiaoli's clothes without a hint of shame, while her desperate son struggles to shove one of them away, trying to save her mother from getting clapped in front of him. Right at that moment, the guy with the ponytail, known as Li, shows up, asking what all the noise is about. One of the goons answers, saying they're about to have some fun, and invites Li to join in. But the ponytail guy tells him that the job isn't finished yet, so there's no time for messing around. They better focus and get to work. The goon gets annoyed and asks why it's a problem, since they've done this kind of thing many times before. The ponytail guy gets pissed off to see this horny gorilla not catching the gist of the situation. He reminds the goon that he's messing with Zhang Shengzhe's wife and kid. He warns the goon that if she can't handle it and tries to kill herself, Zhang Shengzhe will have nothing left to lose. He'll come after them all, and nobody's getting out of that alive. He gives the horny gorilla some hope, saying that once they deal with her husband, they'll come back and work her to the bone, not letting her rest for a single day. The horny gorilla calls Lee party pooper for ruining the mood, but he decides to take the advice anyway. With that, the goons start walking out of the room. One of them shoots her a creepy look, telling her to wait for her turn. The mother and son are left helpless, with nothing to do but cry. As night falls, the zombies start to roam the streets, and in these desolate roads, our boy is cruising in his car. He's deep in thought, reflecting on his recent gains. With 13 points in stamina, he's now got more than twice the strength of an average person, and his reaction time and control have improved significantly. He's zooming through the cluttered streets, drifting his car around corners, feeling the rush of adrenaline with every turn. The entire place is crawling with zombies, so our boy decides it's time to get out of the car. The city center is ahead, and driving would attract too much attention, so it's time to go on foot. Just then, he hears roars. He turns around and sees 2 zombies charging at him. But our guy isn't fazed. He dashes to avoid the direct hit, locks his shoulder into one of the monsters, and throws it hard enough to knock over another zombie. Quickly, he summons his sword and charges at them once again, going full throttle. With one swing, both zombies lose their heads in an instant. These zombies have become nothing more than punching bags for our boy to test his newfound strength and reflexes. He's amazed at how easily he's overpowering them now. There's no doubt in his mind that he's gained more than twice the physical strength of an average person. On top of that, his instincts have sharpened, and with his enhanced hearing, he can tell that the place he's looking for is only about 800 meters away. Meanwhile, a group of zombies is relentlessly banging their heads against the window door of a grocery store. Inside, the survivors are doing their best to fortify the front gate, piling heavy objects in front to keep it secure, hoping it'll hold long enough for them to figure out a way out. The terrified brat asks his father if they're going to die here, to which the father tries to reassure him, saying that these sons of witches can't get in, and even if they do, it's still a win because they'll be reunited with his mother. Of course, the father's words don't offer much comfort, and the brat starts crying even louder. The officer gets annoyed and can't believe what the father just said without thinking it through. He's irritated by the brainless nonsense this father told his son. But the sassy father shoots back, saying if he had enough brain cells to think before speaking, he would have been a property manager by now. By now, even the officer starts to worry that they might actually die here. Just as the tension peaks, they hear gunshots. One of the zombies clinging to the door has its head obliterated, and the brat falls to the ground in shock, while the father is left clueless about what just happened. The officer tells them to move the heavy stuff aside to see who's outside and warns them not to make any noise. As they carefully peek through the gate, they realize that all of the nearby zombies have been dealt with, so they cautiously step out. The brat starts shouting something about a mutant. The father quickly asks what he's talking about, and the son explains that it's a stronger and faster version of a regular zombie, just like in the comics, novels, and games. The father gets annoyed by his entertainment-obsessed son and snaps back at him, wondering how he can still be talking about games and stuff even in the face of danger. He's now sure that this is why his son always had the worst grades. The officer turns to the father, telling him to stop bickering, and asks how the hell grades are relevant right now. He urges them to hurry up and keep a close watch on their surroundings, since they don't want that mutant to ambush them. Don't forget that this father's name is Old Song, so we will be calling him that. As they move forward, the officer warns them once again to stay alert and keep an eye on their surroundings as they slowly head toward the base. When they reach a fork in the path, they stop. The father looks across the street and spots a boy standing there. It's none other than our boy, who's clearly busy with his system, adding points and adjusting his stats. At that moment, the brat starts shouting that it's a mutant zombie. But the officer, being the only one with enough brain cells, quickly realizes that this guy definitely looks like a survivor, not a zombie. It seems like these guys have caught our boy's attention. He chuckles at the brat for mistaking him for a mutant zombie, and tells the kid to stop letting his imagination run wild. The officer perks up with relief, realizing it's actually a survivor. Moving cautiously, he approaches our boy and tells him it's too dangerous to be out here alone. He advises him to come with them, as they need to stick together if they want to survive. He invites him to join their group. Jiang Xiaoyang asks the group about their identity, as he has no clue who they are or why only a few of them are stuck here. While scanning the area, the officer explains that they're out looking for supplies, and that there are still quite a few civilians gathered at Rongxiang Garden. The mention of Rongxiang Garden triggers a memory for Jiang Xiaoyang, and he recalls that there's a Junyu mansion nearby, not far from where they are now. Old Song agrees, saying it's just across the street. He then tells Jiang to come with them, stressing that there's strength in numbers. Officer Lee has a gun, and with their experience dealing with mad zombies, they're confident they can protect him. Seems like they just don't know about our boy's background, and even our boy does not try to boast his title and just humbly agrees to this. Later, they move forward cautiously. Old Song asks Zhang Xiaoyang why he wants to go to Junyu Mansion, wondering if there's someone important he's trying to find. Zhang Xiaoyang replies with a simple yes, and Old Song follows up with another question, asking if it's a relative or a girlfriend. Old Song reminds him that it's the end of the world, so whoever he's looking for is probably already dead, and he better prepare himself mentally for that. The officer grits his teeth and agrees, saying that even if they weren't killed by the Ravagers, they could have encountered those beasts. The mention of beasts catches Zhang's attention, and he asks for clarification. Officer Lee reveals that a group of thugs is holed up in the Buyu Mountain Villa area in the east of the city. To survive, they don't hesitate to harm other survivors, and they ran into them once, losing many of their companions at their hands. The man decides not to talk about it any further, reminding everyone that they must stay vigilant when encountering other survivors. Suddenly, the brat shouts for the officer to be careful. As the officer spins around, he notices a zombie lunging at him. The officer quickly takes it down with a few well-placed shots. Officer Lee pants heavily after the close encounter, his heart racing as he'd thought he was done for. However, it seems the gunshots have attracted the attention of nearby zombies, and the officer quickly falls into panic mode. But right at that moment, he spots an abandoned bus. Everyone rushes toward the bus. Zhang Xiaoyang grins as he thinks ahead of them. In his mind, running recklessly could attract even more zombies, but the bus, as a closed shelter, is perfect for defense. The only downside is that if it falls, there's nowhere to retreat. After weighing the pros and cons of the decision, Zhang decides to give this emergency plan a score of 70. Everyone has already made it into the bus when Officer Lee tells him to hurry and keep up. At that moment, Zhang Xiaoyang jumps into the bus, and Officer Lee quickly slams the door shut behind him. The officer warns everyone to be cautious and check each seat for any hidden ravagers, but the brat quickly shouts that the zombies are not giving up. They're still gathering outside. Officer Lee grits his teeth in frustration, realizing that despite their fast escape, the zombies are still hot on their trail. The zombies begin banging on the bus, trying to break in. With each passing second, the number of zombies increases, and the officer does his best to keep the gate closed, but it looks like this is just too much for the poor officer. That's when Jiang extends his hand and slams the door with such force that the zombies are pushed back, and the door is completely sealed. Officer Lee is left stunned, his jaw hanging in disbelief at such incredible strength. Zhang Xiaoyang then comes up with a plan, and states that he's blocking the door to keep it shut, and suggests that they should smash the windows and fight back. Surprisingly, the officer agrees and decides to place some faith in Zhang Xiaoyang. At that moment, they shatter the bus windows, and zombies trying to cling to the bus are struck on the head by Old Song. The others assist Old Song, making sure he doesn't topple off while hanging out the window. Officer Lee, however, is holding back on using his bullets, as he doesn't have many left and wants to reserve them for when things get dire. That's when Zhang Xiaoyang pulls out a crossbow and tells Officer Lee to use it. The officer is bewildered, not understanding how this guy seemingly pulled the bow out of nowhere. Zhang casually explains that he just picked it up earlier. With that, Old Song and Officer Lee join in, using the crossbow and their own strength to clear out the zombies. After a while, they manage to defeat all of the zombies, and finally, they make it out of the bus they had been using as shelter. The brat, feeling absolutely confident and full of himself, believes they've just turned a dangerous situation into a safe one. He's convinced this can't be a coincidence, and that they must be the children of fate in this apocalypse. My guy then tells everyone to stay cautious and not make the same careless mistakes again. Meanwhile, back at the fort, everyone is hoping that things go smoothly for Zhang Xiaoyang. Lu Yiming decides to keep watch that night. The glasses guy asks why he's suddenly so enthusiastic, and Lu Yiming, annoyed by the teasing, tells him to stop talking nonsense. He reminds him that he had always been sincere with his duties. The fatty quickly gets humbled by his friend's reaction, and asks why Lu Yiming is getting so worked up over a bit of banter. Regardless, Uncle Sheng decides that since Lu Yiming is taking charge bravely, everyone else should head back to their rooms and rest, so they can make the most of Yiming's help. Uncle Sheng then advises Lu Yiming to wake everyone up immediately if anything happens. As the night deepens, Lu Yiming sits idly, reflecting on how late it's gotten. Knowing that everyone must have already gone to sleep, he decides to get back to the main goal he's focused on, wanting to settle things before our boy returns. Meanwhile, the old man sleeps soundly with the key of the weapon room lying near his pillow. The old man doesn't even notice when Lu Yiming quietly opens the door to enter. As Lu Yiming approaches the old man's bed, he reaches out to grab the key. But to his surprise, the old man proves to be more alert than expected, waking up just before Lu Yiming can grab it. The old man asks what the hell he is doing, but before he can get any more words out, he receives a solid punch to the face from Lu Yiming. With the key now in hand, Lu Yiming runs as fast as he can, while the old man calls after him, demanding the key back. The commotion wakes others up, and the old man quickly reports to everyone that Liu Yiming has taken the key to the weapons room. They all run as fast as they can to catch that bastard, but the idiot throws a bunch of stuff in the way while running. Everyone chasing him stops right there. It's pretty hilarious though, because they could easily jump over these obstacles, but they just stand there like game characters refusing to enter a restricted area. Li Yuming notices the nursery room on his way and figures he might as well go all the way since he's already doing this. He heads into the room where Chen Chong the zombie is lying on the bed, strapped down. As he tries to approach, the zombie suddenly retaliates with its free hand. Li Yuming is taken aback because the second hand was supposed to be tied down, and he wonders if they made the straps too loose when they bound this freak. This actually makes him even happier though, because it saves him the trouble of untying the zombie. Meanwhile, the others finally make it past the obstacles, and what they find in the corridor is far from pleasant. They're frustrated that Li Yuming went out of his way just to let Chen Chong out of the infirmary. The old man is regretting not realizing sooner that Li Yuming was such a snake. But Shanshan tells him there's no point in regretting now. They need to focus on what to do next. Since all their weapons are locked in the warehouse, they should start by making sure that this zombie gets locked back in the infirmary. Uncle Sheng decides to use the method Zhang Xiaoyang taught them earlier. Stay careful and avoid letting the monster bite. With that in mind, they start walking toward the zombie. Zhang Qi quickly grabs the bastard by the neck, while the other two help hold its hands down. The old man contributes highest out of all, pointing towards the infirmary and telling them to drag the zombie back. With a countdown of 3, they push the zombie back into the infirmary and lock the door as securely as they can. Once the zombie is locked inside, one of them wonders if it's just him, or if restraining the zombie wasn't as hard as expected. Everyone else shares the same thought. But the old man reminds them that they've wasted so much time here, that little brat must have gotten all the weapons by now. Right at that moment, Li Yuming shows up and questions the old man's audacity to call him a little brat. Sadly for everyone, the bastard finally has a gun in his hands. However, he seems annoyed by the fact that the storeroom only had one weapon, but he figures this one will be enough to deal with all of them. After he takes care of everyone, he'll take his sweet time searching for the other weapons. Li Yuming points his gun at them, ordering them to move back into the room. Jiang Qi tries to reason with the bastard, reminding him that it was Zhang Xiaoyang who saved everyone and gave them a chance to live. But Li Yuming reminds them that our boy always acts high and mighty. Saving their lives doesn't mean they have to serve him like slaves for the rest of their days. The old man also calls this bastard an ungrateful sucker. Meanwhile, inside the infirmary, Chen Chong seems to have his own plans, and it looks like he's about to intervene in the heated argument. But before anything can happen, the scene transitions to Rongxiang Garden, where Officer Li is giving precise directions to our boy, telling him how to reach Jinyu Mansion. He warns that the layout of the residential area is complicated, making it easy for zombies to hide, so he needs to be extra careful. Officer Li tells Jiang Xiaoyang that once he finds the people he's looking for, he should return to Rongxiang Garden to meet everyone. He advises Jiang to take the side gate of the community, not the main gate, for safety. Jiang thanks him and says he'll keep that in mind. As he begins walking his way towards his next destination, Old Song suggests helping him out, since he helped them fend off those zombies and saved their lives. But Officer Li reminds him that they have no idea what the situation is like inside Jinyu Mansion. If they accidentally walk into a horde of zombies, everyone will be dead in no time. Zero Song asks why they're letting Jiang walk into what seems like certain death. Officer Li replies that he's already warned Jiang as much as he could, so all he can do now is feel pity for him. He adds, though, that they shouldn't overlook the skills Jiang has. He's clearly capable. Meanwhile, outside, the area is crawling with zombies, and inside, the goons who are taking Zhang Sheng's family hostage are getting annoyed to see that Zhang Sheng has not come back. The other thug doesn't care and says he's held his frustration in long enough, so tonight he's letting it all out on his wife, otherwise he won't be able to sleep. Seems like these idiots are just waiting for a dead man to return. One of them, though, seems smart enough to realize that Zhang might be dead since he went out alone. The other disgusting thug adds that when they clap her, they'll make sure to tie her up so she won't have a chance to kill herself. They have no idea when things might go south, so they decide to make the most of the time they have left. Meanwhile, the lady trembles, hearing the goons plotting against her. Ponytail finally gives his friends the green light to go, but he tells them to be careful and not let anything happen to the woman, especially not while doing anything naughty. Suddenly, Ponytail notices something unusual outside. As we peek outside, we see that all the zombies have mysteriously dropped dead. While this reason may be unknown to that bastard, we know exactly what's going on. Ponytail decides to take a look outside, wondering if it could be a rescue team. But before he can go any further, his life chapter ends right there. As he steps outside, he's met with a dagger slash that cuts his throat clean off, and his head rolls over the ground. Meanwhile, the other thugs in the room are ready to claim their prize. They look absolutely thrilled and aroused as they start undoing their belts. They yank her son away from her and slap her hard across the face for yelling. They throw the kid aside, but the little brat has some courage and is willing to fight with everything he's got. However, they kick him out, not wanting any more trouble, and slam the door shut behind him, leaving the poor kid outside. At that moment, the headless body of Ponytail collapses to the ground, leaving the kid frozen in shock. But what stuns him even more is the silhouette standing over the doorway. But there is nothing to fear about because it's our boy, Zhang Xiaoyang. Jiang looks at the kid and asks if Zhang Shengji is his father. The boy stutters for a moment before managing to respond. Meanwhile, inside the room, the thugs have already started tearing the woman's clothes as she struggles to cover her up. One of them, cocky and smug, slaps her hard across the face, demanding her to scream out loud as they harass her. But the woman stays silent as she does not want her son to hear her suffer. Eventually, the thug just decides to go over her and then let his other buddies have their turns. But before he could do anything, the door slams open. One of the thugs thinks it must be the brat who kicked the door open, but before he can react, his head is cleanly sliced off, and he goes silent instantly. His friend, clueless about what just happened, asks why he's standing there like a fool and tells him to just kick the brat out. But what his friend doesn't know is that the guy has already lost his head and promptly collapses to the ground. The others are completely confused, not understanding what's going on. At that moment, Zhang Xiaoyang grabs one of them and slams him hard against the wall. The thug, who had been happily undoing his belt, stutters, asking Zhang's identity. But Zhang doesn't bother with an answer. Instead, he delivers a solid kick to the thug's face, knocking him out cold and finishing him for good. The scene transitions back to the fort, where Li Yuming is holding his gun against everyone. He tells them one last time to move, or he will shoot. The old man tells the others to just do as this bastard says and move to the room. However, Shanshan decides against this idea. The old man, though, insists she follow his orders since Li Yuming has the gun, but reassures her that he'll think of something later. Li Yuming just smirks disgustingly and reminds them that there's nothing to figure out. He threatens them, saying they haven't seen his ruthlessness and decisiveness yet, and that he will definitely establish his dominance. He decides to take the old man down first, since he's the one yapping the most. The other two standing behind the old man try to talk him out of it, but just as they're speaking, they hear a sound. Suddenly, the lock on the infirmary door begins to move, and with a loud swing, the door opens. To everyone's shock, it's Chen Chong, who had somehow used the key to free itself. They find it ridiculous that Chen Chong managed to unlock the door himself in his berserk state. It's clear that Chen Chong has a bone to pick with Li Yuming, and he locks his deadly glare onto the bastard. Li Yuming quickly points his gun, determined not to let a monster who can open gates at will live. He pulls the trigger, but to his despair, the gun jams, and he realizes he's about to get screwed. Before he can react, the monster lunges at him, tearing him apart and killing the bastard who's kept everyone on edge for the past few chapters. Not only does Chen Chong take out Li Yuming, but he also drags his lifeless body toward the infirmary. No one knows what's happening, and all they can do is watch in complete disbelief. Chen Chong, on the other hand, grabs the key to the infirmary door, tosses it aside, and he locks himself in, leaving everyone standing there bewildered. Meanwhile, Zhang Xiaoyang is done taking down the thugs and finally frees the wife. He then calls the kid over to him, but the protective mother holds her son close, asking Jiang what he plans to do with him. Jiang doesn't bother explaining and simply tells the kid to come over. The kid finally decides to trust him, assuring his mother it'll be all right. When he reaches Jiang, our boy hands him a dagger and tells him to kill these bastards. The thugs quickly realize what is coming for them next, so they start begging for their lives. Even the mother tries to protest, saying he's just a child. But Jiang states that he's no longer just a kid, and that everything changes from this moment. He tells the kid that, from now on, he's the one responsible for protecting his mother, so he needs to gather his courage and eliminate the monsters who hurt her. The disgusting smirks of those thugs flash in the boy's mind. Fueled by all his anger and courage, he charges at the bastards, and in the end, he takes them down, finally avenging his mother's suffering. The mother looks horrified as she watches her son, while the kid himself is consumed with anger. He knows that even after killing these bastards, his father isn't coming back. In a moment of grief and frustration, he asks Jiang if his father is pushing up daisies now. Sadly, Jiang responds with a somber yes. The boy, unable to handle the weight of it all, throws the bloodied knife to the ground. He rushes toward his mother and hugs her as tightly as he can, seeking comfort in her embrace. The mother, desperate to keep her son safe, pleads with Jiang to take him with him, offering to do anything he wants in exchange for her son's safety. But the boy, determined to stay by her side, says he wants to protect her. But Jiang invites both of them to come with him. He reveals that he had promised Zhang Shengji that he would keep them safe. With that assurance, the mother and son follow Jiang closely, walking past the dead bodies of the defeated thugs. The kid looks scared to see those bodies, and he is even more scared about the monster who killed these guys. Jiang, with his usual calm, replies that it was he who took down all of them. By the way, let's not forget that this kid's name is Shuai and his mother's name is Xiaoli. Suddenly, Jiang gestures for them to stop, sensing some suspicious sounds nearby. He turns to Xiaoli and asks if she knows where Building 8 in Banyan Garden is. The mother responds by reminding him that it's the same direction he is currently facing, and asks him why he's asking about it. The scene then shifts to Building 8, where a group of looters stands outside, demanding supplies from everyone inside. They assure the residents that they will spare them if they surrender their resources. Inside, our team is hiding in the apartments, debating whether they should give in. Officer Lee quickly shoots down the idea, saying that the looters are animals who won't keep their word and will kill everyone except the women. The thugs outside continue shouting, giving everyone just 10 minutes to cooperate or risk being killed. Inside, one of the women thinks about going outside to beg the looters to spare them, but the other protests, refusing to become a plaything for those animals. But the gorilla silences both of them, telling them not to worry. He assures them they aren't planning to surrender and tells them to guard the hallway, confident that the looters won't be able to get past them. Meanwhile, the gang leader of looters outside smirks to himself, thinking about how well armed they are. His lackey, however, knows their strength isn't enough to force their way in, as the leader of the survivors inside is armed. Not to mention they are hiding, making it even harder to force their way inside. But the leader just smiles as he says they don't need to force their way through. Instead, he orders his men to cut off the water supply to the first-floor apartments and waits to see how long they'll hold out. While these thugs plot their tactics, Zhang Xiaoyang stands nearby, watching these guys sneakily. Shuai innocently asks if these are bad people, to which Zhang responds positively. It's both humorous and ironic that Shuai is asking such an innocent question, especially considering he's the one who just killed 3 grown men with a dagger. One might expect some solid character development from the kid, but he still seems to have his childish charm. Zhang then reminds Shuai that these are the same kinds of people who bullied his mother, and that's why they need to be dealt with. Meanwhile, Officer Lee tells everyone to guard the stairs and stay hidden, as he plans to check out what these guys downstairs are up to. Officer Lai then walks over to the window and sneaks a peek outside, noticing that all 7 of them are armed, with 3 of them packing guns. But then, a loud bang echoes through the air, catching Officer Lee off guard. The rest of the group is just as confused, not knowing what's going on. As we know, though, these guys are getting ripped apart by bullets from Zhang Xiaoyang, and one of their men goes down. The others are left clueless about who just took them out. That's when Officer Lee spots Zhang Xiaoyang, gun in hand, making his way forward. My guy starts doing open fire, and one of the goons takes a direct headshot. When they spot him standing in the middle of their ring, they start shooting back with their pistols. But Zhang just keeps walking forward, unfazed, as not a single bullet even comes close to grazing him. This only makes him smirk at the sight of these amateurs. He raises his gun, aiming at the boss of the lackeys hiding behind the concrete block. But his bullets hit the block instead. The frustrated boss shouts at his lackeys, telling them to start firing while our boy is busy shooting him. The lackey eventually stands up straight, fully determined to take Jiang down himself. But Jiang quickly shifts his aim, pointing the barrel of his gun directly at the guy, and with one or few bullets, he blows the bastard's head off. The leader of the squad sneers from behind the concrete block, feeling smug as he thinks Jiang must be out of bullets by now. Confident, he decides to make his move, aiming his gun at Jiang. But Zhang Xiaoyang meets his gaze with a cold, unwavering stare, standing tall right in front of the guy. As soon as the thug pulls the trigger, Jiang moves his head with lightning speed, avoiding the shot. He grabs the thug's arm, the one holding the gun, and in a fluid motion, aims the same gun right under the bastard's neck. Without hesitation, Jiang pulls the trigger, sending a bullet through the guy's head. And just like that, the entire squad of criminals has been taken care of. Zhang then rummages through the leader's dead body, searching for anything useful. After that, he makes his way into the building, only to find that there are still some goons left from the squad. The remaining thugs launch themselves at him without a second, desperate to take him down. But Jiang doesn't even flinch. He stays rooted in place, unfazed. And all that breaks the silence are 3 quick gunshots, each perfectly placed, dropping the thugs on the spot. Watching all of this, Shuai is over the moon with excitement, clearly impressed with how our boy handled the fight. He can't help but admire him even more. Right then, a system task appears in front of our boy, revealing his next objective, which is to recruit survivors from Rongxiang. Completing this task promises a reward. Zhang Xiaoyang asks about these people, and Officer Lee responds, explaining that they're from the Biquishan villas, located to the south of the city. Officer Lee then quickly calls over the 2 yellow-jacketed men, Liu Chao and Chen Ji, telling them to brief Brother Yang about Biquishan since they ran over from the south. The two yellow-jacketed guys reveal that the people there are a gang, armed, well-resourced, and holed up in Baekhuishan villas, taking in nearly all the survivors from the south. This makes Zhang Xiaoyong pause, thinking back to his previous life. He wonders if Baekhuishan could be where Li Shuxian and Quijing's settlements were, and whether it could be them who took over. He asks the yellow-coated guys if they're implying that Baekhuishan is the only settlement left in the south now. The yellow-coated man replies that it wasn't always the case, but the gang had weapons, and the smaller settlements couldn't defend themselves. As they took over each place, they killed half the population and then abducted the young and pretty women, and anyone who was willing to be complicit. Zhang Xiaoyong is certain about who is behind this, and when Officer Li hears his confident declaration, he asks what he means by it. Zhang replies that the three guys they just took down each had handguns, and he tells them to hold on to them and check for extra magazines, because there's probably more of them out there. He also gives them his rifle and tells Officer Li to keep it, and he'll leave them 5 magazines. Hong explains that the Baekhuishan crew won't let this go, and with these weapons, 10 or so men should not be an issue now. He tells them to hold out here for a couple of days while he reorganizes back home and then comes back to deal with that shitty crew. One of the men standing there is shocked and asks if Zhang is seriously planning to take on Baekhuishan. He points out that they're probably dozens strong, if not more, and it's no small task to go up against them. Officer Li tries to convince Zhang that it's not worth the risk for them. He suggests that they just find another place. Our boy reassures Officer Li not to worry about it, because he already has some beef with the Baekhuishan crew. Besides, in a few days, he plans to return with a bigger vehicle to evacuate everyone to the east of the city, near the old Tea Leaf City. He's building a stronghold there and will need people to help. With that, Zhang turns and walks away, offering a casual goodbye and telling them to take care of themselves. He also takes Xiaoli and Shuai with him. The scene transitions to a darker, more ominous setting. Dead bodies lie scattered around, and outside, a lone guard is on duty. The place he's guarding is none other than Baekhuishan. Inside the mansion, we see the people running this gang. Wenge, with his orange hair, is the boss of this place, and he asks why they haven't dealt with the supplies at the Jinyu Entertainment Center yet. Xiaoli, the overweight man, responds during a meeting, saying he's already sent people over, so they should be back by now. But little do they know, those people have already been wiped. The other guy, known as Kai Gay, addresses the fatty, and reminds him that there are quite a few high-end affiliates living over at Jinyu Mansion. They can't just take the supplies from the entertainment center without consequences. Xiaoli assures him that his people are already instructed to bring back anyone alive. The boss looks furious and openly expresses his disappointment with Xiaoli, frustrated that he still hasn't completed a single task assigned to him. Feeling the weight of Wen's anger, Xiaoli humbly promises that this time, everything will be handled perfectly, while Kai Gay smirks in the background, pleased to see Xiaoli sweating under the pressure. Once Xiaoli steps outside for some air, one of his lackeys notices his sour mood and asks why he looks so defeated. Xiaoli snaps back, asking if the 7 men he sent have returned. The lackey informs him that he sent people an hour ago to check, and they reported back that the whole squad has been wiped out. The news leaves Xiaoli stunned and terrified. He can't believe that regular civilians from Rongxiang Gardens could take down 3 armed men. In a panic, he commands his lackey, Taozi, to gather everyone who can handle weapons. This time, he's determined not to let the mission fail. Meanwhile, Zhang Xiaoyong finally makes his way back to the base. As soon as Shanshan hears the sound of the car, she quickly realizes that it must be Brother Yang returning. When Jiang enters the boundary of his fort, the mission window pops up, notifying him that the mission has been completed successfully. Shanshan greets him, happy to see him back, but Jiang quickly notices that Lu Yiming is missing from the crowd. My guy feels absolutely glad to see that his hunch about that snake was spot on. Everyone is shocked when they realize that Jiang knew about Lu Yiming all along. Jiang then points to Xiaoli and Shuai, asking the others to show them to their rooms and then meet him in the infirmary. Once he's alone with his party, Jiang explains that he had known from the start that Lu Yiming had ill intentions. While he admits that he wasn't entirely sure it was him, he was certain that one of Zhang Qi's friends was a scumbag. Zhang Xiaoyong then throws a big gun towards Zhang Qi. As Bleachhead catches it and examines the bullets, he quickly realizes they're rubber bullets. The old man's mind clicks and quickly asks about the kid Chen Chong, who's inside the infirmary. Jiang strides confidently toward the infirmary, casually mentioning that Chen Chong isn't an ordinary zombie. Instead, he's a rare mutant, a fact my guy had already confirmed some time ago. He had asked the zombie to blink 3 times, and to his surprise, the zombie complied. Jiang explains that after the apocalypse, those infected by otherworldly sources have a slim chance of becoming rare mutants. These mutants usually possess far greater intelligence and potential than regular zombies. They may even retain fragments of their past memories, and Chen Chong is exceptionally rare among the rare. Jiang then opens the door, and the first thing they see is Chen Chong standing over the head of the man who had been causing trouble. The zombie quickly waves his hand upon seeing Jiang. Jiang orders him to stop holding back, saying there's no need to restrain himself and he should get rid of this bastard now. As the mutated guy begins dragging that snake out, his bleached head friend asks him if he remembers him, and the zombie's feet falter as he stops and looks at Zhang Qi. No one can figure out what's going on in the zombie's mind. Abruptly, he swings his hand at the bleach head, who barely dodges it in time. It seems that Chen Chong is just messing with his old friend, which explains to Zhang Qi how even as a zombie, he still can't keep his hands to himself. Later, Zhang Xiaoyong is staring at his system screen. Zhang Chai unlocks a hidden achievement titled Mutual Companion, and the achievement is completed, adding system points to Zhang's total. Jiang is surprised to see that he's unlocked a hidden achievement, a nice little bonus. Curious, he decides to check if the shop has anything new. Upon looking, he notices a level 2 box labeled High-Tech Supply Box, something he's never seen before. However, it's expensive, and Zhang hesitates to spend his hard-earned 50 points on it. Instead, he opts to open the remaining 2 boxes first, figuring they won't take up space anymore. As he opens both of them, he receives 2 unexpected items. The Lifesaver Supply Box grants him an interdimensional infection blocker, which offers a chance to block otherworldly infections, but can't reverse mutations that are already complete. The Armed Deterrent Supply Box surprises him even more as it contains a Barrett M82, a powerful sniper rifle, along with a bundle of bullets. Zhang is amazed at his crazy luck. Not only does he receive a game-changing weapon from a level 1 box, but the infection blocker is a real deal breaker. The idea that it could potentially stop someone from fully turning into a zombie excites him. This stroke of fortune fills him with confidence, making him even more eager to open the level 2 box. He can barely contain his excitement, but he knows he has a mission to focus on first. His current task is to recruit survivors from Rongxiang Garden, and he's looking forward to completing it tomorrow. Outside, Chen Chong tosses the snake out of their fort's vicinity, since there's no place for traitors like him. As morning arrives, everyone gathers in the training grounds. From the old to the young, each person is armed and ready. Zhang announces that starting today, everyone must spend at least an hour practicing their shooting daily. They begin firing at target bottles, and each hit creates a flash of light. It's impressive to see the cans visibly hit, but not exploding from the shots. Zhang turns to Uncle Sheng, instructing him to have Zhang Qi gather everyone and clear a few more rooms, as he plans to bring back survivors from Rongxiang Garden today. The old man promptly agrees, ready to carry out Zhang's orders. Zhang also orders Chen Chong to accompany him on the escort mission, knowing the mutant zombie's strength and abilities will come in handy. Later, they finally find an abandoned bus, currently overrun by mindless zombies. But Zhang clears the zombies with ease, and Chen Chong helps by throwing the creatures out of the bus as well. Once the bus is cleared, Zhang hands Chen Chong the bus keys, telling him that he can take off his mask if he wants to now, as there's no need to restrain himself. However, he adds that once they reach Rongxiang Garden, he should make sure to put the mask back on so he doesn't scare anyone. The mutant guy acknowledges the order with a growl. Meanwhile at Bikwishan, Xiaoli is gearing up to depart for Rongxiang Garden, accompanied by a group of lackeys. This time, Xiaoli is personally leading the charge, determined to take down Rongxiang Garden once and for all. He refuses to believe that he's going to lose, not with the numbers and weaponry he has at his disposal. Their truck roars to life and speeds out of the compound, headed for Rongxiang Garden. After cleaning up and hijacking a random bus filled with zombies, Zhang Xiaoyong hopped on the driver's seat and quickly got to work. He saw a few more zombies clogging the highway and did not even think of stepping on the brakes for a single second. Our boy mowed through those mindless monsters like the gigachad that he is. With his enhanced reaction speed, he used the bus to drift and swerve through the plethora of abandoned cars blocking his personal freeway. Back in Rongxiang Garden, the high-rise building seemed peaceful from the outside. Inside, the group of survivors led by the reliable cop, Big Bro Lee, are currently munching on their rations, careful not to burn through their limited supplies all at once. Their mealtime was interrupted by the loud sound of a car engine coming from outside. The kid reckoned that Brother Xiaoyang must have come back to rescue them. Thankfully, Big Bro Lee has a good head between his shoulders. He grabbed his AK-47 and signaled everyone else to be silent while he checked out the situation first. With utmost caution, he slowly peeked his head above one of the windows with a clear line of sight outside. What he saw was not their savior but a group of thugs hungry for revenge. They are checking their weapons and looking for building number 8. Upon confirmation, the thugs took arms, and upon confirming their target location, Li Shuxiang ordered his men to move out. Big Bro Li was stressed out. Just when he thought they could leave their hiding spot to join Brother Yang's fortress, the bastards from Bichui Mountain showed up. Old Song raised his pilfered pistol, ready to face the scumbags who just can't learn their lesson. Now that they have a few guns distributed among the group, The survivors have gained quite a bit of confidence. Big Bro Lee yelled at the fake tough civilians to not get cocky. Right outside is a whole battalion that outnumbers and outguns them by a mile. He reminded everyone to stick to the plan, and as he headed to the rooftop, he set up an ambush. Outside, the Beachui Mountain Battalion gauged if they had reached the optimal distance to terrify the survivors holed up in the building. Led by Li Shuxiang, they collectively raised their scoped weapons, carefully aiming at the numerous windows of building number 8. Old Song peeked through the window and immediately screamed at everyone inside to be careful and take cover. The silent morning was interrupted by the sound of automatic weapons firing wildly into the high-rise. Every window within range was shattered, pushing Old Song back deeper. After the first wave of warning shots, Shuxiang ordered one of his lackeys to hand over the megaphone. While he negotiates a deal, the others must keep aiming and wrecking the windows with the intent of shooting anyone who dares to show their face. Shuxiang arrogantly spoke to the mic, demanding the attention of the survivors hiding inside. Before he could put another threat or another word in, the lackey right beside him got his skull pierced and his brains scrambled by a bullet. The thugs froze in fear. They were not expecting to be targeted by hidden snipers at all. The next thing you know, another bastard fell to his ass after receiving a clean shot to the leg. Up on building number 8's rooftop, the muzzle of the AK-47 spreads the smell of gunpowder in the air while the thugs scramble to find cover. Big Bro Lee has posted up in an optimal spot with a clear vision of the enemies. Beachui Mountain never could have anticipated that the survivors would have long-range automatic weapons in stock. Shuxiang blamed the intel they received for the fact that the survivors only had one pistol. Even if they pilfered the weapons of the 7 idiots that died last time, there should only be 4 pea-shooters. The panicked thugs turned to their boss for their next move, afraid of getting picked off by the unseen threat. The simple answer was to retreat. You see, these bastards are not exactly the sharpest tools in the shed. They took that order literally and scattered like headless chickens running out of cover instead of waiting for the signal to run together. As you would expect, running in the open streets with a deadly sniper is a recipe for disaster. The cop on the rooftop was as ruthless as he was accurate with that AK. Shuxiang berated his dumbass lackeys for running to their deaths. He counted down to 3, and the remaining bastards retreated as if their lives depended on them. That's because it did. While his lackeys skedaddled in a panic, Boss Lee remained hidden in his cover wall. It did not take the sniper on the roof to adjust his aim and kill off the retreating thugs one by one, racking up headshots and body shots one after another. From the beginning, Boss Lee's strategy was to use his men as fodder until the sniper ran out of ammo so he could safely run back to his car. A certified scumbag move. As he expected, the sniper had run out of ammo and had to reload with a fresh clip for a bit. Shuxiang's fat ass managed to reach the car safely. From a whole battalion, they are down to just 4 people, and unfortunately for the last one that lagged a few seconds behind, Li Shuxiang is in the driver's seat, and he could not be bothered to risk getting domed while waiting for another expendable unit. Catboy got his brain pierced by the high-caliber bullet and it was lights out. The other 2 that were fortunate enough to hop into the cargo bed lowered themselves, afraid to suffer the same fate that everyone else in their group went through. Back on the main road, Jiang Xiaoyang's magic school bus is still blazing through the clogged freeway like he was playing Mario Kart. Our boy was as cool as a cucumber while he navigated his way back to rescue the survivors. Given that the roads are pretty much abandoned at this point, seeing another car speeding up in the opposite direction was quite a surprise. Even though he could have, Xiaoyang chose not to meddle or chase. He is focused on the mission at hand. Currently, obtaining points is of paramount importance to him. After a few minutes of smooth cruise control, he arrived at the front of building number 8. Chen Chong, the friendly zombie, and Xiaoyang got out of the bus and immediately saw the aftermath of the shootout. The young man was impressed to see that the rifle he left behind came in handy. He also connected the dots that the car he just saw must have belonged to the fleeing raiders. Chen Chong looked at the fresh and bullet-hole-ridden human corpses scattered on the ground and started salivating while growling like an animal. Xiaoyang smiled and asked his zombie pal if he was hungry. He gave Chen Chong the green light to go crazy on the fresh carcasses. It's better that he gets the human meat feast instead of leaving it for the mindless zombies around the area. As soon as he heard that he was free to stuff his jaws with sustenance, Chen Chong smiled like a fucked-up-looking kid in a candy store. Xiaoyang lets this boy run free as long as he meets him under Building 8 after the feast. Chen Chong did not waste a second and bit on the sinewy neck meat of the nearest dead thug. He savored the taste of blood and flesh touching his tongue. As soon as he swallowed, an invigorating feeling spread across his body. Meanwhile, Jiang Xiaoyang strolled through the bloody battlefield as if he were taking a leisurely walk in the park. Based on the efficient method the thugs were dealt with, he was impressed with how decisive Li Hongli was when it comes to killing. The kid poked his head above the broken windows upon hearing footsteps, and he immediately lit up upon seeing Xiaoyang. Upon confirmation that it was their savior, The rest of the survivors showed themselves and enthusiastically beckoned him to come closer. With the super cop in the front, the survivors packed up and met the young man downstairs. Big Bro Lee formally thanked Xiaoyang for lending him the counter-strike weapon that saved everyone's asses. As it turns out, before this dude retired, he was an expert marksman. Their happy reunion was interrupted by a loud guttural roar reverberating from afar. It was followed by the sound of steady footsteps. The survivors were frozen in terror as soon as they saw what was inching closer to them. It's our favorite badass zombie, Chen Chong, limping over with a strained look on his face. Big Bro Lee was the fastest one to react. He grabbed the trusty AK-47 and quickly aimed at the approaching zombie. Xiaoyang calmly held down the rifle and told the survivors to relax since this guy was one of them. He says the beast is one of them, but everyone is having a hard time believing in such a ridiculous statement. Can you blame them? Xiaoyang directed Chen Chong's attention to the rest of the dead thugs nearby, telling him to fill up on some more free grub. Big Bro Lee was amazed and terrified. He asked if Xiaoyang has the ability to talk to zombies or anything of the sort. The young man asserted that Chen Chong was not an ordinary zombie. It's a complicated matter, so he urged everyone to get on the bus first and promised to explain everything to them on the way. As they walked to the bus, Xiaoyang reminded his zombie buddy to eat quickly and come back to the bus as soon as he was done. Chen Chong gave the okay gesture as if he couldn't be bothered to stop his gory chomping. After putting every dead Beachway Mountain thug into his stomach, Chen Chong fished out his muzzle and put it back on. The survivors could not take their eyes off the bizarre scene ahead. The kid could not even fathom how one of these mindless berserkers would even have the lucidity to put a muzzle over their mouths on their own. Xiaoyang warned the kid not to let Chen Chong hear him call the specialized mask a muzzle if he didn't want to get hit. Low-key, the kid is starting to find the mutated zombie cool. After his one-man feast, Chen Chong stepped into the bus like a normal chill dude. Upon eating so many people in one go, his mass increased a lot, and the bus noticeably tilted to the side as soon as he got in. This time, Chen Chong had even managed to speak slurred words while he handed the key of the muzzle back to his bro. Even Xiaoyang wasn't expecting that Chen Chong would gain the ability to speak so soon, even if it was just a single word. He ate a total of 6 corpses, and must have started evolving further. Right now, Xiaoyang's primary concern is getting everyone back to his home turn to convert his points and strengthen the settlement. He sat in the driver's seat and warned everyone to hold tight as he drove from 0 to 100 real quick. Back in Beachway Mountain's headquarters, Li Shuxiang had to report his failure back to his superiors. He was berated for being an idiot who couldn't accomplish anything. He tried to plead his case to Boss Lin. He tried to wash his hands of any fault as he received inaccurate intel going into the raid. He wasn't informed that the survivors had automatic rifles at all. Boss Lin refused to believe his excuse. Logically speaking, it's hard to believe that a small-town cop would be in possession of an automatic rifle in this country. The big boss was offended, thinking that Shuxiang would cook up such a stupid lie. But he stood his ground and asked if they could send someone to check the battlefield to see if he was lying or not. The right-hand man of the boss had enough of his bullshit and kicked the bastard down to the ground. That's Li Shuxiang's cue to get the hell out of the room. Mr. Right Hand has been starting to get sick of Shuxiang's idiocy and uselessness for a while now. Since the fool cost them heavy losses in manpower, they could always just nip the problem directly from the source and kill the bastard. Another Beachway Mountain executive, Boss Shu, called out the right-hand man's real reason for resenting Li Shuxiang. This perv right here has been eyeing Shuxiang's girl for a while now. The pervy fox proposed that they share the bastard's girl amongst themselves to think of her as shared property. Boss Lin smiled. He seemed on board with that idea, but insisted that they do not have to rush. They have to find the perfect opportunity first. Unbeknownst to the corrupt thugs, Li Shuxiang never left. He was just listening in to their disgusting conversation from the entrance. He gritted his teeth in anger. Bro really needs to snake his way out of this one. A few hours later, he went back to his lavish house and threw a childish tantrum. Out of frustration for his own incompetence, he wrecked his own place like a dumbass. His girl came out to check on him, trying to console the fat bastard. Li Shuxiang simply told her to start packing as they have to leave this place as soon as they can. She asked where they would go, and he couldn't give a straight answer. The only thing certain is that this place won't be safe anymore, and they need to plan ahead. Boss Li called his assistant Qingzi, and the loyal lackey ran in like a good boy. He ordered Qingzi to gather all their remaining men as they prepared to depart at midnight. His girl could sense that something was obviously wrong, and she did not like it at all. Anyways, back to the people that actually matter. Xiaoyang pulled up to his compound, parking the big bus into one of their many indoor parking areas. The survivors from building number 8 hopped out of the vehicle and marveled at the sheer scale of Xiaoyang's doomsday fortress. With them safe and sound, the survivor recruitment mission has been completed. He was tasked to rescue 5 of them, but he managed to bring back 8. Apart from the 25-point reward, he was given another 5 points as bonus, pushing his total to 66. Xiaoyang turned to his zombie buddy and informed him that tomorrow night, they were going on a two-man mission to the Southern District. Big Bro Lee overheard the human-zombie conversation and curiously asked what was in the Southern District. The young man simply told him that he had to go take care of some unresolved cross-time grudges with the people at Bichui Mountain Villa. By nightfall, Xiaoyang locked himself in his room while eyeing the level 2 high-tech supply crate worth 50 points, which he now has enough points to purchase. Without hesitation, he clicked the item's logo, excited to find out what was inside his first level 2 crate. Upon redeeming it successfully, his current points plummeted down to 16. A bright light swirled around his body as Zhang Xiaoyang prayed not to be let down after spending a fortune.